The New Mexico sun did not just shine, it hammered against the earth, demanding submission from every living thing that dared to crawl across the scrubland. It was the summer of 1878, and the heat rose in shimmering waves off the hard-packed dirt of Dustwater's main street. The town was an assemblage of weathered timber and ambitious dreams, clinging to the edge of civilization like a burr on a saddle blanket. Dustwater lived up to its name. The wind here did not blow. It scoured, carrying the taste of alkali and the pungent, musky scent of horse sweat. Sheriff Caleb Ward leaned against one of the support posts of the porch outside his office, the wood warm against his shoulder blade. He tipped the brim of his hat lower, shading eyes that were the color of a storm cloud, gray and watchful. He was a young man with the tin star pinned to his vest, perhaps 27 or 28 years of age. He was not built like the sideshow strongmen that occasionally passed through the territory, all bulged muscle and theatrical grunts. Caleb was lean and efficient, constructed of long, ropey sinew that spoke of endurance rather than explosive power. "The stage is late again," a voice rasped nearby. Caleb did not turn his head. He knew it was merely old Pete, the town drunk who functioned as the unofficial town crier. "The road is bad near the canyon. Pete, a wheel probably threw a rim, or the natives got him," Pete muttered darkly, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "Red Hawk's people are not raiding stages." "Pete, you know that," Caleb said, his voice calm but carrying an edge that discouraged argument. He scanned the horizon, where the purple bruise of the distant mountains met the bleached sky. Somewhere up there was the sacred canyon, and somewhere closer was the cloud of dust that signaled the arrival of the overland stagecoach. The town was vibrating with a nervous sort of energy. The railroad was coming. Everyone said so. The surveyors had been seen hammering stakes into the ground, marking a path that would cut right through the heart of the territory. With the railroad came money. And with money came men like Silas Crow. And with men like Silas Crow came trouble. The stagecoach crested the final rise. The horses lathered and blew hard, the driver cracking his whip with a theatrical flourish that was entirely unnecessary. The vehicle was coated in a thick layer of travel grime, looking less like a carriage and more like a brown beetle scurrying for cover. It rumbled down the main street, the heavy wheels grinding against the earth, finally shuddering to a halt in front of the mercantile and the station office. The door of the coach swung open. A thin man in a dusty suit tumbled out first, coughing and slapping his hat against his thigh. Then there was a pause. Inside the dark, stifling interior of the coach, Rowena Blake took a deep breath. She gripped the handle of her reticule so tightly that her knuckles turned white beneath her gloves. This was it, the end of the line, the beginning of something new, or so she prayed. Rowena was not a small woman. She had never been small, not even as a child. She was built with the sturdiness of an oak tree rather than the fragility of a willow. Her waist was soft, her hips broad, and her arms, hidden beneath the fabric of her travel dress, were strong from years of hauling water and scrubbing floors for a family that viewed her size as a personal moral failing. Her face was round and flushed from the heat, framed by brown hair that she had disciplined into a severe bun, though a few rebellious tendrils had escaped to stick to her damp neck. She moved to the door, and the frame suddenly seemed very narrow. "Need a crane for that one," a voice shouted from the gathering crowd on the boardwalk. It was one of the ranch hands from the Crow estate, a man with a gap in his teeth and a cruel sense of humor. Laughter rippled through the bystanders. It was not a warm sound. It was the sharp, jagged laughter of people who enjoyed seeing someone else uncomfortable because it distracted them from their own misery. Rowena froze. The heat in her cheeks intensified, burning hotter than the sun could account for. She kept her eyes fixed on the wooden step of the coach, refusing to look up, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing the tears that pricked at the corners of her warm brown eyes. Big freight, her father had called her, expensive to feed and hard to move. A hand appeared in her field of vision. It was not a gloved hand of a gentleman, but a working man's hand, scarred and tanned, with long, steady fingers. "Step is a bit high, ma'am," a voice said. It was a deep baritone, lacking the mockery that poisoned the air around them. "Allow me." Rowena looked up. Startled, she found herself looking into the gray eyes of the lawman. He did not seem to be straining or bracing himself as if he expected to catch a falling boulder. He just stood there, waiting, his expression open and mildly amused, not at her, but at the situation. I can manage, Sheriff," she stammered, her voice low. "I have no doubt you can," Caleb replied comfortably. "But my mother raised me to be polite. If I just stand here watching, she might reach down from heaven and box my ears." Rowena let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She placed her hand in his. His grip was firm and dry. She shifted her weight, stepping down onto the iron step and then to the ground. The wood of the boardwalk groaned slightly under her boots, or perhaps she only imagined it because she was listening for it. Caleb did not let go of her hand immediately. He steadied her until she had her footing, ignoring the snickers from the gallery of idlers. He was tall, she realized. She was a tall woman, but she still had to look up slightly to meet his gaze. "Welcome to Dustwater," Caleb said, touching the brim of his hat. "I am Sheriff Ward, Caleb Ward." "Rowena Blake," she replied, smoothing the front of her dust-streaked skirt. She tried to stand as tall as she could, pulling her shoulders back. "Thank you, Sheriff." "Rowena," he repeated, testing the name. "That is a nice name." "Strong," before she could decide if he was mocking her. The moment was shattered by the arrival of a man who walked as if he owned the very air they were breathing. Silas Crow stepped off the porch of the bank, his silk vest gleaming in the sunlight, a gold watch chain draped across a paunch that spoke of expensive dinners. He was a handsome man in a predatory way, with silvering hair and eyes that assessed value rather than humanity. "Sheriff," Silas drawled, his voice like oil on gravel. "I see the new supplies have arrived. Although by the look of things, we might need to reinforce the boardwalks." The laughter from the crowd grew louder. Emboldened by the richest man in town, Rowena felt her stomach drop. The humiliation was a physical weight, heavier than the trunks she had strapped to the roof of the coach. Caleb turned slowly to face Silas. He did not look angry. Rather, he looked bored. "Mr. Crow, I believe you have a bank to run. Unless you have decided to take up a new profession as a town greeter, you are not very good at it." Silas's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. "Just making an observation. Sheriff, we are a growing town. We need to make sure we have space for everyone." He looked Rowena up and down, his gaze lingering on her waist with open disgust. "Though some take up more space than others." Rowena clenched her hands into fists at her sides. "Do not cry," she ordered herself. "You did not travel 2,000 miles to cry in front of a man wearing a velvet vest in the desert." "I am here to see my cousin," Rowena announced, her voice trembling slightly but loud enough to be heard. "Clara Miller. She runs the seamstress shop near the livery. She is expecting me." The silence that fell over the group was sudden and absolute. The laughter cut off as if a knife had severed a string. Even the ranch hands shifted their feet, looking at the ground. Caleb's expression shifted from mild amusement to something graver. He stepped closer to Rowena, effectively blocking Silas from her view. "Miss Blake," Caleb said softly, "why don't we step into my office, or perhaps the hotel parlor? It is cooler there." "I want to see Clara," Rowena insisted, a cold knot forming in her chest. "Why are you looking at me like that? Is she ill?" Silas let out a short, sharp laugh that sounded like a bark. "Ill. That is one way to put it." "Quiet, Silas," Caleb warned, his hand drifting instinctively toward his hip, though not touching his gun. He turned his full attention to Rowena. "Miss Blake, I am afraid I have bad news. Your cousin, Clara, passed away 3 months ago." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The dust, the heat, the jeering faces, it all swam together. "Passed away, but I have a letter, dated 4 months ago. She said business was good. She said, "It was an accident," Caleb said, choosing his words with care. "She was out near the canyon, looking for herbs. They said she fell. It is a rugged country out there." Rowena stared at him. Clara, who had been nimble as a goat, Clara. Who knew these hills fell? "That is what the report says," Silas interjected smoothly. He pulled a cigar from his pocket and bit the end off. Tragic. She really should not have been wandering around Indian land. Dangerous business. A lesson for all of us to stay where we belong. Rowena felt a wave of dizziness. She had sold everything she owned. She had burned her bridges with her family, telling her brother she would never scrub his floors again. She had come here with nothing but her sewing machine, her books, and the promise of a partnership. Now she had nothing. No home, no family. Just a town that laughed at her and a sheriff who looked at her with pity. "I need to sit down," she whispered. Caleb took her elbow firmly. "Come with me. The hotel has a cafe. I will buy you a lemonade. It is lukewarm, but it is wet." He steered her away from the stagecoach and the prying eyes of Silas Crow. As she walked, Rowena could feel the eyes of the town on her back. She heard the whispers. Big freight. Useless. All that meat and no one to cook for. High above the town, on a ridge of red sandstone that overlooked the valley, a figure crouched in the shadow of a twisted juniper tree. Red Hawk was young, perhaps the same age as the sheriff below, but his face carried the weathered stoicism of a man who had seen too many winters and too many broken treaties. He adjusted the strap of his quiver across his chest. His dark eyes tracked the movement on the single street of Dustwater. He saw the stagecoach arrive. He saw the large woman step out. He saw his old friend Caleb intervene when the wolves started to circle. Red Hawk did not care about the woman's size. To his people, strength was survival. A woman who could carry water, who could endure the winter, who could bear strong children, this was a woman of value. The white men were strange. They desired women who looked like dried reeds, liable to snap in the first strong wind. His gaze shifted to Silas Crow. The hatred burned in Red Hawk's gut. A low, steady coal. Crow was the snake in the garden. He was the one pushing for the iron road to cut through the canyon of the ancestors. He was the one sending men to put fences where fences had no business being. Red Hawk knew about the woman who had died. Clara. She had been kind. She had once given him a jar of honey when he came to trade, treating him like a man rather than a savage. Her death was no accident. The spirits did not push her from the cliff. Men did. He watched as Caleb led the new woman into the hotel. The storm was coming, Red Hawk thought. The air smelled of lightning and blood. He stood up silently, his moccasins making no sound on the stone, and disappeared back into the labyrinth of the Badlands. The interior of the hotel cafe was dim and smelled of stale beer and frying bacon. Caleb pulled out a chair for Rowena. She sat down heavily, the wood creaking beneath her. She flinched at the sound, her eyes darting to Caleb's face to see if he would smirk. He did not. He simply sat opposite her and signaled the girl at the counter to bring 2 drinks. "I am sorry you had to find out like this," Caleb said gently. He took his hat off and placed it on the table. His hair was dark, flattened slightly by the hat brim, and sweat dampened his forehead. "I would have written, but we did not know she had kin coming." Rowena stared at her hands, resting on the scarred wood of the table. They were large hands, capable hands. "She was my only friend," she said, her voice hollow. "My family. They did not approve of me leaving. They said I would fail. They said a woman in my carriage should be grateful for a roof over her head, even if she is treated like a servant. Families can be wrong," Caleb said. "So, she is really gone." Rowena looked up, her eyes searching for him. "How does one fall in the canyon?" Clara was careful. Caleb hesitated. He glanced around the room. It was mostly empty, save for a drunk sleeping in the corner. But in Dustwater, the walls had ears, and most of those ears belonged to Silas Crow. The official report, signed by the coroner, says accidental death, blunt force trauma from the fall. "You say official report like you do not believe it," Rowena observed sharply. Grief was sharpening her mind. not dulling it. Caleb leaned back, studying her. She was perceptive. That was good. I am the sheriff. Miss Blake. My job is to keep the peace. Sometimes, digging up old rocks causes a landslide that buries the whole town. And sometimes leaving the rocks alone means you trip over them, she retorted. A flicker of a smile touched Caleb's lips. You have a sharp tongue, ma'am. I have had to learn to defend myself, she said, since I cannot run away very fast. It was a self-deprecating joke, a defense mechanism she had honed over 20 years. If she made the joke first, it hurt less when they laughed. Caleb did not laugh. He looked at her with a serious intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. You do not need to run, Rowena. Standing your ground works just fine. The girl brought the lemonades. They were indeed lukewarm and sour, but the moisture was welcome. Rowena drank deeply. The shock was beginning to recede, replaced by the cold, hard reality of her situation. I have $30, she said, doing the mental arithmetic, and a sewing machine, and a trunk full of fabric. The stage leaves for the east on Thursday, Caleb offered. If you want to go back, Rowena laughed bitterly. To what? To my brother telling me I told you so. To sleep on a cot in the kitchen and mend his wife's corsets, while she complains that I'm taking up too much room in the pantry. She shook her head violently. No, I am not going back. Then what will you do? Clara wrote that this town needs a seamstress. The miners need trousers mended. The ladies need dresses. The saloon girls need whatever they wear. Rowena sat up straighter. I am a good seamstress. Sheriff. I can make a silk gown look like water. I can stitch canvas so tight it will hold water. I am going to stay. Caleb raised an eyebrow. It is not an easy town for a single woman, especially, he trailed off, too polite to finish the sentence. Especially a fat one, Rowena finished for him. She said the word flatly, without emotion. I know what I am. Sheriff, I occupy space. I have decided to stop apologizing for it. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then, he picked up his glass and raised it in toast. Do not apologize. Rowena managed a weak smile and clinked her glass against his. Do not apologize. She needed a room. Caleb told her the hotel was too expensive for a long stay, but the owner of the saloon, a woman named Big Maud, rented out rooms on the second floor. They were noisy, situated right above the piano, but they were clean and cheap. And for a shop? Rowena asked. Old man Miller, no relation to your cousin, runs the dry goods store. He has a back room he uses for storage. It has a window facing the street. He might let it to you for a few dollars a month. I will talk to him tomorrow, Rowena said. She stood up. Her legs felt shaky, but they held her. Thank you, Sheriff Ward. You have been unexpectedly kind. Caleb, he corrected. And do not spread it around. Ruins my reputation as a hard-hearted lawman. Rowena walked out of the hotel and back into the blinding sun. The heat hit her like a physical blow. Across the street, Silas Crow was standing in front of the bank, talking to two men in dusters. He looked up as she emerged, his lip curling in a sneer. He said something to his companions, and they laughed, looking right at her. Rowena Blake gripped her reticule. She felt the sweat trickling down her back. She felt the heaviness of her thighs rubbing together. She felt the fear fluttering in her chest like a trapped bird. But she did not look down. She looked straight at Silas Crow, lifted her chin, and turned toward the saloon to find a room. She was staying in Dustwater, and if the town wanted to laugh, let them laugh. She would give them something to look at. As she walked away, Caleb watched her from the hotel window. He rubbed his shoulder where an old bullet wound ached when the rain was coming. He had a feeling that Rowena Blake was going to be more trouble than a barrel of rattlesnakes. And for the first time in a long time, he was looking forward to it. Night fell over Dustwater, bringing a sudden, biting chill that contrasted sharply with the day's furnace. Rowena sat on the edge of the narrow bed in the room above the saloon. The room smelled of beeswax and old tobacco smoke. Below her, the tinny sound of a piano plinked out a lively tune, accompanied by the roar of laughter and the clinking of glass. She had unpacked her trunk. Her few books were stacked on the small bedside table: a Bible, a volume of poetry by Emily Dickinson, and a worn copy of Pride and Prejudice. Her sewing kit sat open on the dresser, the steel scissors gleaming in the lamplight. She walked to the window and looked out. The street was lit by the yellow glow of lanterns hanging from the porch posts. Shadows stretched long and distorted across the dirt. She saw the sheriff's office down the street. A light was burning inside. She wondered if Caleb Ward was sitting there, alone. He was an odd man. He had not looked at her with the mix of repulsion and fetishistic curiosity she usually encountered. He had looked at her as if she were simply a person who took up a bit more room, perhaps, but a person nonetheless. Then her gaze shifted to the dark outline of the mountains. Somewhere out there was the canyon where Clara had died. Rowena shivered, though not from the cold. Accident. Caleb had said, tragic. But Rowena remembered Clara's letters. Clara was not clumsy. And the last letter, the one Rowena had tucked into her corset, had mentioned something strange. The rocks here sing. Rowena. And I found something near the creek bed that glitters like hope, but feels like danger. Silas Crow has been asking about the old survey maps. If I am right about this, we will never have to sew another hem for a penny again. Rowena touched her bodice, feeling the crinkle of the paper beneath the fabric. Clara had found something, and now Clara was dead. Rowena turned away from the window. She blew out the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. She lay down on the bed, the mattress sagging under her weight. She stared up at the invisible ceiling. I am here, Clara, she whispered into the dark. And I am not leaving until I know what happened. Downstairs, the laughter roared again, a wave of sound that shook the floorboards. Rowena closed her eyes. Let them laugh. Tomorrow, she will open her shop. Tomorrow, she would start stitching her life back together, one seam at a time. The bolt of calico fabric weighed close to 20 pounds, but Rowena Blake carried it against her shoulder as if it were nothing more than a sack of feathers. The afternoon sun in Dustwater was relentless, baking the boardwalks until the wood groaned underfoot. Rowena wiped a bead of sweat from her temple with her free hand, her breathing steady despite the heat. She had spent the morning negotiating with Old Man Miller for the back room of his mercantile, and to seal the deal, she had purchased enough cloth to sew curtains for the dusty window and perhaps a new shirt for herself, something practical, something that did not pinch. She stepped down from the mercantile porch, her eyes fixed on the uneven ground. Dustwater was not kind to the clumsy, and Rowena had learned early in life that when one occupied more space than others, falling drew a devastating amount of attention. Out of the way, a voice slurred. Before Rowena could turn, a body slammed into her side. It was one of the ranch hands from the double-bar spread, smelling of stale beer and unwashed horse. He had stumbled out of the saloon, his boots tangling, and his momentum sent him crashing into Rowena. The impact was solid. A smaller woman might have been sent sprawling into the dirt. Rowena merely staggered, her boots digging into the hard earth, her sturdy frame absorbing the blow. However, the bolt of calico slipped from her grasp, unrolling in a colorful tongue across the dust. "Watch where you are going, you great lumbering," the drunk began, trying to regain his balance. "Careful there, Jeb." A calm voice cut through the air. Sheriff Caleb Ward stepped off the boardwalk, his hand reaching out to steady Rowena. He did not look at the drunk. His gray eyes were focused on her, checking for injury. "Dizzy heat gets to everyone. Miss Blake, are you steady?" "I'm fine, Sheriff," Rowena said, her face flushing not from the collision, but from the proximity. Caleb's hand was warm on her elbow, his grip firm. "Here, let me get that fabric," Caleb said, bending down. He never touched the cloth. The crack of a rifle shot shattered the afternoon lethargy. It was a sharp, dry sound, like a whip snapping against bone. Caleb jerked violently, as if an invisible hammer had struck his left shoulder. Blood blossomed instantly on his shirt, bright red against the pale linen. He spun halfway around, his knees buckling, and pitched forward. Rowena did not scream. Screaming was a luxury for women who expected others to save them. She saw the sheriff falling, saw the spray of blood. An instinct took over the instinct of a woman who had lifted heavy iron skillets and hauled water buckets since she was 12. "Get down!" she yelled, her voice surprisingly deep and commanding. Another shot kicked up a fountain of dirt inches from where Caleb's head would have been if he had not fallen. Rowena dropped to her knees, not gracefully, but with purpose. She grabbed Caleb by the back of his vest and his good arm. He was a tall man, dead weight now as shock set in. But Rowena gritted her teeth, planted her heels, and pulled. Her biceps strained, the seams of her dress pulling tight across her shoulders. But she did not let go. She dragged him 3 feet, 4 feet, hauling him behind the thick oak water trough that sat in front of the livery stable. "Stay down," she ordered, pressing a hand to his chest to keep him flat in the dust. High above the street, from the roof of the feed store opposite them, a shadow moved. The assassin racked the lever of his rifle, aiming for the exposed leg of the sheriff. Then, a different sound echoed from the distant ridge, the whistling hum of a long-range shot, followed a second later by the boom of a buffalo rifle. On the roof, the assassin yelped. His rifle clattered down the sloping shingles and fell into the street. The man scrambled backward, clutching his arm, and vanished over the far side of the roof, running for his life. Rowena did not look up to see who had fired the saving shot. Her world had narrowed to the man bleeding in the dirt beside her. Caleb was blinking rapidly, his face draining of color. "Shoulder," he gritted out, his teeth clenched. "It burns." Rowena looked at the wound. The bullet had passed through the fleshy part of the shoulder. It was messy, and the blood was flowing too fast. "I need pressure," she said. She looked around. The calico was in the street, ruined and out of reach. She looked at her own dress, sturdy cotton, hard to tear. Without hesitating, she reached under her skirt, found the hem of her white petticoat, and gripped it with both hands. With a sharp grunt of effort, she ripped the fabric. The sound of tearing linen was loud in the sudden silence of the street. She ripped a long, wide strip, bunched it up, and pressed it directly into the hole in Caleb's shoulder. Caleb hissed, his back arching off the ground. "I know," Rowena said, leaning her weight onto her hands, using her heavy frame to apply steady, unyielding pressure. "I know it hurts. Breathe. Sheriff, do not you dare pass out on me." People were beginning to shout now, doors banged open, but for a long minute, it was just Rowena and Caleb in the dust behind the water trough. He looked up at her, his eyes hazy but focusing on her face. He saw the sweat dripping from her chin, the fierce set of her jaw, the absolute lack of panic in her brown eyes. "You are strong," he whispered. "Good thing one of us is," she replied, her voice shaking only slightly. Shadows fell over them. Rowena looked up to see Silas Crow standing there, flanked by 2 of his hired guns. The banker was immaculately dressed, not a speck of dust on his polished boots. He looked down at Caleb, and for a fleeting second, Rowena saw a flash of genuine annoyance, not that the sheriff was shot, but that he was still breathing. Then the mask slipped back into place. Silas put a hand over his heart, feigning shock. "Good heavens," Silas exclaimed. "Sheriff Ward, is he alive?" "He is," Rowena said, not moving her hands from the wound. "No thanks to the security of your town, Mr. Crow." Silas's eyes flicked to Rowena. He took in her disheveled appearance, the dust coating her skirt, the way she loomed over the injured man. A smirk touched the corner of his mouth. "Well, it appears you have the situation well in hand, Miss Blake," Silas drawled. "Or rather, you have effectively smothered the danger. I suppose it is fortunate you were there to serve as a barricade. Not many bullets could make it through such substantial fortification." The men behind him snickered. Rowena felt the insult land like a slap. The adrenaline that had allowed her to drag a grown man was fading, replaced by the cold, familiar shame. She looked down at herself kneeling in the dirt, her dress strained, her size undeniable. "He needs a doctor," Rowena said, refusing to look at Silas. "Someone help me get him to the doctor." "Get the wagon," Silas ordered one of his men, waving a hand dismissively. "And find out who fired that shot. We cannot have madmen running loose in Dustwater. It is bad for business." He looked at Caleb again. "Rest up, Sheriff. Do not worry about the law. I will have my boys keep an eye on things while you recover." The sun went down, but the heat lingered. Trapped in the dusty streets, the incident had been the talk of the town for hours. By evening, the saloon was packed. The piano player was hammering out a ragtime tune. But the real entertainment was the gossip. Rowena sat at a small table in the far corner of the room, nursing a glass of lukewarm water. She had washed the blood from her hands and changed her dress, but she could not wash away the memory of Silas Crow's eyes. She should have stayed in her room upstairs, but the heat up there was stifling, and she refused to hide like a frightened mouse. "Did you see it?" a voice boomed from the bar. It was the drunk, Jeb, now sober enough to be cruel. Sheriff went down, and then wham, that big freight hauler grabbed him like he was a rag doll. "I heard the bullet actually hit her first," another man laughed, slapping the bar. "But it bounced off. Too much padding." The room erupted in laughter. It was a raucous, ugly sound. "No, no," a third man chimed in, mimicking Rowena's walk. "The shooter missed because of the gravitational pull. She sucked the bullet right out of the air." Rowena gripped her glass. Her knuckles turned white. Her face burned with a humiliation so deep it felt like it was scorching her bones. The whole town laughed. That was what it felt like. It was not just a few men. It was the barmaid giggling behind her hand, the piano player smirking as he played, the very walls seeming to shake with mirth at her expense. She stared at the water in her glass, watching the ripples caused by her trembling hand. She wanted to stand up and scream that she had saved a man's life. She wanted to tell them that while they were cowering under tables, she was stopping the blood. But she knew it would not matter. To them, she was not a hero. She was a joke. Grotesque. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and stinging. She started to push her chair back, intending to flee to her room, to pack her trunk and leave on the morning stage. The double doors of the saloon swung open with a crash. Silence rippled through the room, starting from the door and spreading to the bar. The laughter died in my throat. Caleb Ward stood in the doorway. He looked pale, his left arm bound tightly in a sling against his chest, his shirt clean but unbuttoned at the collar. He wavered slightly on his feet, but his eyes were clear and cold as winter ice. "Sheriff," the bartender stammered, "we thought you were resting." Caleb walked into the room. Every step looked like it cost him something, but he moved with a dangerous kind of grace. He stopped in the center of the room, looking from one face to another. "I was resting," Caleb said, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the silent room. "Until I heard the braying of jackasses all the way down the street." He turned his gaze to Jeb. The ranch hand shrank back against the bar. "I hear you boys have a lot to say about what happened today," Caleb said. He walked closer to the bar. "You think it is funny? We were just having a laugh. Sheriff," Jeb mumbled. "About the situation." "The situation," Caleb repeated. "You mean the situation where a man tried to put a .45 caliber slug in my heart?" He turned slowly, scanning the room. His eyes landed on Rowena in the corner. She froze, terrified that he, too, would make a joke to regain his standing with the men. Caleb looked back at the crowd. "Let me tell you what I saw today. I saw a street full of men who carry guns, men who talk big about being tough. And when that first shot rang out, I saw every single one of you run for cover like frightened rabbits." He took a step closer to Jeb, invading the man's space. "But Rowena Blake..." "She did not run. She stood in the line of fire. She dragged me to safety. She tore up her own clothes to stop me from bleeding out in the dirt. She had more courage in her little finger than this whole room has in its collective spine." The silence in the saloon was absolute. You could hear the hiss of the oil lamps. "So," Caleb continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that sounded like a growl. "If I hear one more word of disrespect toward that woman, one joke, one snide comment, I will throw you in a cell for disturbing the peace, and I will leave you there until you learn what the word respect means. Am I clear?" "Clear, Sheriff," someone muttered. Caleb nodded once. He turned and walked toward Rowena. The crowd parted for him. He reached her table and leaned heavily on it with his good hand. He looked exhausted, pain etching lines around his mouth, but his eyes were soft when they met hers. "Walk me to my office, Miss Blake," he asked quietly. "I am afraid I might fall down again, and I would hate to give them another show." Rowena stood up. Her legs felt weak, but her heart was hammering a rhythm of fierce pride. She ignored the stares of the room stairs that were no longer mocking, but shamed and assessing. She offered Caleb her arm. "Lean on me, Sheriff," she said. "I intend to," he replied. Later that night, the moon rose high and white over Dustwater. Rowena sat on the small wooden balcony outside her room. The air was finally cooling. She had changed into her night wrapper, watching the shadows of the town. She heard a soft scuff of a boot on wood. She turned sharply. Caleb was there, sitting in a chair in the shadows of the balcony divider, but he was not alone. A figure stepped out from the darkness of the roof overhang. It was a man Rowena had only seen from a distance. He wore buckskin leggings and a calico shirt, his black hair hanging loose around his shoulders. It was the native warrior, Red Hawk. Rowena gasped and pulled her wrapper tighter. "Sheriff, it is all right, Rowena," Caleb said softly. "He is a friend. He is the reason I still have a head on my shoulders. That second shot today came from his rifle." Red Hawk looked at Rowena. His face was unreadable, his dark eyes taking in her form without the judgment she was used to from white men. "You move well for a woman of the town," Red Hawk said. His English was accented but clear. "You have strong hands." "Thank you," Rowena said, uncertainly. "We have a problem," Caleb said, his voice grim. He gestured for Rowena to pull up a chair. The fact that he included her sent a thrill of validation through her. Red Hawk tracked the shooter. He did not catch him, but he found where he had been waiting. Red Hawk stepped forward, placing an object on the small table between them. It was a brass casing, but next to it was a cigar butt, an expensive brand. "Silas Crow smokes those," Rowena whispered. Crow did not pull the trigger. Caleb said, "He is too careful for that, but he paid for the bullet." The shooter left a trail that leads back to the railway camp. "The Iron Horse men want the canyon," Red Hawk said, his voice vibrating with suppressed anger. "Crow promised them the land, but the land is not his to give. My people have lived in the Red Rocks since the first sunrise. We will not leave." "Silas is trying to clear the board," Caleb said, rubbing his bandaged shoulder. "He tried to kill me to get me out of the way. If there is no sheriff, or if he puts his own man in place, he can force the sale of the canyon land." Rowena looked from Caleb to Red Hawk. The pieces of the puzzle were clicking together in her mind, sharp and terrifying. "My cousin," Rowena said suddenly. "Clara." Caleb looked at her. "What about her?" "She wrote to me," Rowena said, her voice trembling. "She said she found something near the canyon, something that glittered, and she said Silas Crow was asking about old survey maps." Red Hawk's eyes narrowed. "Gold. Or silver," Caleb said. "If there is ore in that canyon, Silas does not just want the railroad fees. He wants the mining rights. That is why he needs the land. And that is why Clara died," Rowena whispered, the horror of it settling in her stomach like a stone. "She found it. She knew. And he killed her for it." "We cannot prove it," Caleb said. "Not yet. He owns the bank. He owns the mayor, and he has half the territory on his payroll." "Then we fight," Red Hawk said. "My warriors are ready." "No," Caleb said sharply. "If you attack the town, the army will come. They will wipe your people out. Red Hawk, that is what Silas wants. He wants an Indian war so the army will clear the land for him." "Then what do we do?" Rowena asked. She looked at the two men, one wounded lawman, one warrior on the brink of losing his home. and she realized she was standing right in the middle of them. "We found proof," Caleb said. "Real proof. The kind that a federal judge cannot ignore. We found what Clara found. And we stay alive long enough to show it," Red Hawk added. Rowena looked down at the street below. It was empty now. The laughter had faded, but she knew the danger was just beginning. She had come to Dustwater to sew dresses and hide from the world. Now, she was conspiring with a target and an outcast to take down the most powerful man in the territory. "I am staying," Rowena said, her voice firm. "I am opening my shop tomorrow. Silas expects me to run. He expects me to be scared and useless." Caleb looked at her, a slow smile spreading across his face. "He is making a mistake." "A big one," Rowena agreed. Red Hawk nodded at her, a gesture of respect. "The bear is slow to anger," he said cryptically. "But the bear breaks the back of the wolf." He slipped over the railing and vanished into the night as silently as smoke. Caleb winced as he shifted in his chair. "You should sleep. Rowena, tomorrow is going to be a long day." "Does it hurt?" she asked, nodding at his shoulder. "Like fire," he admitted. "But knowing you are watching my back makes it bearable." Rowena felt heat rise in her cheeks, and for once, it wasn't from shame. "Good night, Caleb." "Good night, Rowena." She went back into her room, but she did not sleep for a long time. She lay awake listening to the wind, feeling the weight of her own body on the bed. For the first time in her life, she did not wish she was smaller. She wished she was tougher. She wished she was harder. Because if Silas Crow wanted a fight, Rowena Blake was going to give him one. She closed her eyes, picturing the map of the canyon she had seen in her cousin's sketchbook. She had a mystery to solve, and she had a sheriff to keep alive. The town could laugh all they wanted. Rowena was done listening. The sign was modest, painted on a piece of reclaimed pine that Rowena had sanded down herself until her knuckles were raw. It read simply, "Blake Stitchery." She hung it above the door of the small, drafty storage room she had leased from the dry goods merchant, hammering the nails with a heavy iron mallet that looked comically small in her capable hands. Dustwater did not offer a welcoming committee. The reception was less fanfare and more gauntlet. As Rowena stepped back to admire her work, a group of children playing hoop and stick in the dirt paused. A boy, no older than 10, puffed out his cheeks, stuck his stomach forward, and began to waddle in a grotesque exaggeration of a heavy gait. His companions shrieked with laughter, the sound sharp and cruel in the thin desert air. Rowena stiffened, her hand tightening on the handle of the mallet. She did not turn around. She had learned 20 years ago that acknowledging the jesters only encouraged the performance. From the porch of the livery stable across the street, the adult commentary was no kinder. "Hey, Miller," a ranch hand shouted, spitting a stream of brown tobacco juice. "Are you renting that room for sewing, or are you storing the winter grain supply in there?" "Reckon she is sewing wagon covers," another man drawled, leaning back on a crate. "Or maybe hot air balloons. She has got the patterns for it right on her." "Does she stitch shirts or saddlebags?" The first man guffawed. "I need a lot of leather to cover that much acre." Rowena walked into her shop and closed the door. She leaned her back against the wood, closing her eyes for a brief second. The laughter outside was muffled, but it still vibrated through the timber. She took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of raw cotton and cedar shavings. Work, she told herself. Just work. She set up her heavy Singer machine on the sturdy table she had reinforced with extra bracing. She arranged her spools of thread by color. She opened her book of patterns. For 3 days, no one came. The women of the town, the wives of the ranchers, the churchgoers, the respectable matrons walked past her window with their noses high, pretending the shop did not exist. To patronize the big woman was to admit she belonged. And Dustwater was not ready to admit any such thing. On the 4th afternoon, the bell above the door jingled. Rowena looked up from a hem she was practicing. Standing in the doorway were 2 women who looked as out of place in the daylight as vampires. They wore satin in the middle of the afternoon, one in a garish crimson, the other in a faded emerald green. Their faces were painted, and they smelled of cheap rosewater and gin. They were girls from the Golden Spur Saloon. The woman in crimson, a redhead named Ruby, looked around the shop with a critical eye. "I hear you can sew," she said, her voice raspy from too many late nights. "I can," Rowena replied evenly. Standing up, she did not sneer. She knew what it was like to be judged by the cut of one's jib rather than the content of one's character. Ruby threw a bundle of silk onto the counter. It was a dress, torn violently at the shoulder seam. "Drunk miner got handsy, ripped my best gown. The old biddy who used to sew for us said she would not touch sinful garments. You got a problem with sinful garments." Rowena picked up the silk. It was cheap fabric, but the color was vibrant. "My needle does not judge. Miss, it only mends. Silk is silk." Ruby smiled, a genuine expression that cracked the powder on her face. "I like her. She is practical. Fix it, and make it tighter in the bust. Gravity is starting to win the war." They were her first customers. By the end of the week, Rowena had mended 3 corsets, 2 silk gowns, and a velvet riding habit for the madam of the house. The respectable women still sneered. But the money in Rowena's tin box was real silver, and it was spent just as well at the grocer. A week later, the bell rang again. The heavy thud of boots on the floorboards announced a different kind of visitor. Sheriff Caleb Ward had to duck slightly to clear the doorframe. He was still moving stiffly, his left arm in a sling, but some color had returned to his face. He took off his hat, holding it in his good hand. "Afternoon, Miss Blake," he said. The small shop suddenly felt very crowded. "Sheriff," Rowena said, feeling a treacherous flush rise up her neck. "You should be resting on that shoulder. The doctor said you needed 2 weeks. The doctor is an old hen who thinks a man dies if he sneezes," Caleb said, though his eyes were smiling. "Besides, I have official business. Is it illegal to sew on a Tuesday?" "No, but it is illegal to walk around with a coat that looks like a cheese grater took a bite out of it." Caleb held up his duster with his good hand. The shoulder was shredded where the bullet had gone through, and the bloodstains were dark and stiff. "I need a new one, something durable, and maybe a vest for the Founders' Day dance. I hear the railroad bigwigs will be there, and Silas Crow will be wearing silk. I cannot look like a vagrant." Rowena hesitated. "There is a tailor in Santa Fe." "I am not in Santa Fe," Caleb said softly. "I am here, and I hear you are the best stitch in the territory. Ruby tells me you performed a miracle on her bodice." "Ruby talks too much," Rowena murmured, but she reached for her measuring tape. "Come here, then. I cannot measure you from across the room." Caleb stepped onto the small dais she used for fittings. He stood still, smelling of saddle soap and rain. Rowena approached him. The yellow measuring tape looped around her neck. She had to get close. There was no other way. "Arms up, or the good one, at least," she instructed. She passed the tape around his chest. Her hands brushed against the solid warmth of his back. She could feel the slow, steady beat of his heart through his shirt. She circled him, her movements efficient but gentle. When she brought the tape around to read the measurement, she was standing inches from him. Her face was level with his chest. She looked up. Caleb was looking down at her. He was not looking at the fabric. He was looking at her eyelashes, her mouth, the curve of her cheek. "You are doing well, Rowena," he said quietly. It was not a question. "I am surviving," she corrected, stepping back to write down the number. 42 inches. "Surviving is a good start," Caleb said. "But I was hoping to live." Rowena moved to measure his waist. She had to reach around him again. Her arms encircled him, a fleeting embrace sanctioned by commerce. For a moment, she rested her hands on his sides to steady the tape. His muscles bunched beneath her touch. "It is hard to live when you are the town punchline." "Caleb," she whispered, using his first name without thinking. Caleb's hand moved, covering hers where it rested on his side. His skin was rough, warm, and shocking. "Let them tell their jokes. Jokes are for small minds. You saved my life. That is a fact. And facts outlast jokes every time." He squeezed her hand, then released it. The moment hung in the air. thick as molasses. Before Rowena cleared her throat and stepped back. "I will have the vest ready by Friday," she said, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. "The coat will take longer." "Friday is perfect," Caleb said, just in time for the dance. The Dustwater Saloon had been scrubbed, polished, and festooned with patriotic bunting for the arrival of the railroad delegation. The air was thick with cigar smoke, cheap perfume, and the frantic energy of a town desperate to prove it was worth a train stop. Rowena had not intended to go, but Ruby and the girls had insisted. They had descended upon her shop like a flock of tropical birds, bearing a gift. "Blue silk," Ruby had declared. "We pooled our tips. You fixed our dresses. We fixed your night. You cannot wear that brown sack you call a dress to the biggest night of the year." They had practically sewn her into it. It was a deep, midnight blue, cut with a square neckline that displayed the creamy skin of her throat, but remained modest. It was truly fitted, nipped in at the waist and flaring out over her hips. It did not hide her size. It celebrated the architecture of her body. But standing at the double doors of the saloon, Rowena felt like a ship about to crash against the rocks. She pushed the doors open. The noise of the fiddle and the chatter did not stop, but it changed. Heads turned, eyes widened. Then, the whispers started. "Look at that," a voice hissed near the door. "Is that the seamstress? Looks like she is wearing the whole bolt of cloth. Imagine trying to swing that around the dance floor." A cowboy laughed, nudging his friend. "Need a team of oxen." "Here comes the barrel of flour," someone shouted from the back. A young ranch hand, emboldened by whiskey, jumped into the center of the clear space. He puffed out his cheeks and mimicked a heavy, lumbering walk, holding his arms out as if he were immense. "Clear the track, heavy freight coming through." The room exploded into laughter. It was the same laughter from the street, but louder, amplified by the enclosed space and the alcohol. Rowena stood frozen. The blue silk felt suddenly like a costume, a foolish attempt to paint a pig. Her face burned with a heat that started in her toes and consumed her. She took a step back, her hand reaching for the door handle. She had to leave. She had to run. "May I have this dance?" The voice was low, calm, and cut through the laughter like a blade. Rowena stopped. Caleb Ward was standing in front of her. He was wearing the new vest she had sewn, the gray wool fitting him perfectly. He looked handsome, dangerous, and utterly unconcerned with the braying crowd. He held out his hand, his good hand. "Sheriff," Rowena stammered. I cannot. They are laughing." "I do not hear them," Caleb said, his eyes locked on hers. "I only hear the music. Take my hand, Rowena." She looked at his hand, then at the crowd. Silas Crow was watching from the balcony, a goblet of wine in his hand, a smirk on his face. The railroad men were watching. The whole town was watching. Rowena lifted her chin. She placed her hand in Caleb's. He pulled her onto the floor. The fiddler, sensing the shift in power, faltered and then began a slow waltz. Caleb stepped in close. He placed his hand firmly on her waist, the waist the town mocked, the waist she had tried to hide for 28 years. He pulled her against him, not leaving the polite distance required by society, but flush against his chest. They began to move. Rowena was surprised to find that she was light. Or perhaps Caleb made her feel light. They moved together, a single entity turning in the lamplight. The blue silk swirled around her legs. The laughter died down, replaced by a confused murmuring. It was difficult to mock something that looked so dignified. Caleb leaned down. His breath ghosted against her ear, sending a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "Let them laugh," he whispered, his voice rough with an emotion she dared not name. "The whole town can count your pounds if they want. It makes no difference to me." He tightened his grip on her waist, pulling her even closer, until she could feel the heat of his thighs against hers. "Perfect for me," he murmured. The words hit her harder than the drunkard on the street. Perfect. Not acceptable. Not pleasant despite her size. Perfect. Rowena looked up at him, her brown eyes wide and shimmering. She saw no charity in his gaze. She saw desire. She saw a man who knew exactly what he was holding and wanted to keep holding it, for the first time in her life. Rowena did not try to shrink. She inhaled, filling her lungs, expanding her chest, occupying her space with pride. She smiled, a slow, radiant smile that transformed her round face into something beautiful. "Then lead on." "Sheriff," she said softly. From the balcony, Silas Crow watched the couple spinning on the floor. His grip on the wine glass was tight enough to threaten the crystal. "Your sheriff has eccentric tastes." Mr. Sterling, the railroad representative, noted dryly. He was a thin man with spectacles and a ledger for a heart. Dancing with the washwoman while the town dignitaries weighed, it shows a lack of judgment. "He is young," Silas said smoothly, though his eyes were venomous, "and impulsive. He thinks with his heart, not his head. That is dangerous for a lawman, dangerous for the town, dangerous for your investment." "Indeed," Sterling murmured. "We need stability, Mr. Crow. We need men who understand the natural order of things. The strong rule the weak. The iron conquers the rock." "Precisely," Silas said. "Do not worry, Mr. Sterling. The sheriff will not be a problem for long. I am arranging a change in administration." The music ended, but the spell did not break until they stepped out onto the boardwalk for fresh air. The desert night was cool and vast. "Thank you," Rowena said. She felt dizzy, and not from the waltz. "Do not thank me," Caleb said. He leaned against the railing, looking out toward the dark shape of the mountains. His mood had shifted from romantic to somber. "You saw Sterling, the man with the spectacles." "The railroad man." "Yes. He is here to finalize the route," Caleb said. "They want to go through the jagged pass, through the canyon of the ancestors." Rowena felt a chill. "The canyon? But that is Red Hawk's land," Caleb finished. "And Silas is pushing for it. He says it is the only way, but it is not. There is a southern route, flatter, easier, but it bypasses the land Silas bought up last month." Rowena's mind raced. "The land Silas bought? Is that near the old creek bed?" Caleb looked at her sharply. "Yes. How did you know?" "The letter," Rowena whispered. "Clara's letter. She said she was near the creek bed. She said she fell from the ridge overlooking the bend. That is right where the railroad would bridge the gap." She grabbed Caleb's arm. "Caleb, she was not just looking for herbs. She was looking at the land. She wrote that she found veins of ore that Silas wanted. If the railroad goes through there, they blast the rock. They open the mine for him. And if the railroad goes south," Caleb realized, "Silas owns 5,000 acres of useless dust." "He killed her," Rowena said, the conviction settling in her bones. "He did not just silence her. He removed a witness to the wealth he is trying to steal." 2 hours later, Rowena was back in a room above the shop. She had not gone back to the saloon. The blue dress hung on the back of the door like a ghost. She was sitting at her table, reading Clara's Bible, looking for comfort, when a shadow fell across the page. She gasped and spun around. Red Hawk was standing inside her room. He had entered through the window as silently as a breeze. He wore no war paint, but his presence filled the small room with a primal intensity. "Do not scream," he said. "The sheriff is patrolling the North Road. I came to speak to you." "You broke into my room," Rowena said, clutching the Bible. "I climbed," Red Hawk corrected. "Doors are for people who want to be announced." He moved closer, his moccasins making no sound on the floorboards. "You danced with the lawman tonight. You stood tall. That is good. You will need to be tall for what comes next." "What do you want, Red Hawk?" "To tell you the truth about your blood," he said. "Your cousin, Clara," Rowena's heart hammered. "You knew her?" "She walked the land," Red Hawk said. "She had eyes that saw. She saw the yellow metal in the rock. She showed me. She asked if the white man would tear the mountain down for it." "And what did you say?" "I said the white man would tear the sky down for it," Red Hawk replied bitterly. "She went to Silas Crow. She thought he was a man of honor. She thought she could make a deal, share the wealth, save the sacred places. She was naive. Rowena closed her eyes. He killed her. He sent a man, Red Hawk said. A man with a scar on his neck. They met her on the ridge. I was too far away. I heard the scream. When I arrived, she was broken on the rocks below. And the man was riding back to the Crow Ranch. Why did you not tell the sheriff? Rowena demanded, opening her eyes. Why did you let them say it was an accident? Who listens to the savage? Red Hawk asked simply. If I spoke, Silas would say I killed her. He would use her death to bring the cavalry to slaughter my people. I held my tongue to save my tribe. He stepped closer, his dark eyes boring into hers. But now, the Iron Snake is coming, and Silas is hungry. You are her blood. You have the fire. You want to know why she died, because she tried to stop a mountain from falling. What are you asking me to do? Rowena whispered. Do not just sew dresses, Red Hawk said. Sew a net to catch a wolf. Find the paper. Silas keeps everything. He has a paper that proves he knew about the gold before the railroad came. If you find that, you cut his throat without a knife. He moved back to the window. Wait, Rowena said. Caleb, the sheriff, he is in danger, isn't he? Red Hawk paused, framed by the moonlight. The sheriff stands between the wolf and the sheep. The wolf always eats the dog first. If you love him, woman of the strong back, you will help us destroy the wolf. Rowena stood alone in the room as Red Hawk vanished. She looked at her hands. They were trembling, but they were strong hands. Hands that could drag a man to safety. Hands that could stitch silk. She was done being a victim. She was done being the punchline. I will find it. Clara, she whispered to the empty room. I will find the paper, and I will make Silas Crow wish he had never looked at us and laughed. She blew out the candle. The darkness was no longer terrifying. It was just cover for the work that needed to be done. The heat and dust water had changed. It was no longer just the oppressive weight of the sun. It was a suffocating pressure, heavy with the threat of thunder. The air tasted of static electricity and dry dust. Silas Crow did not need a gun to hold the town hostage. He used paper. In the week following the dance, the town council, a group of 5 men who owed more money to the bank than they could earn in 3 lifetimes, passed the Canyon Safety and Revenue Ordinance. It was a dense document, filled with legal jargon that boiled down to a simple, brutal truth. Anyone owning land within 2 miles of the proposed railroad bridge had to pay a new, exorbitant safety tax, or sell their claim immediately to the Dustwater Development Company, a subsidiary, naturally, of Silas Crow's empire. Sheriff Caleb Ward stood on the porch of the Widow Miller's farmhouse, a piece of paper burning a hole in his hand. The widow, a woman of 60 with hands gnarled like old vine roots, stared at him. $200, she said, her voice trembling not with fear, but with rage. I have not seen $200 in one place since my husband sold the herd in '65. I know, ma'am, Caleb said, his throat tight. It is robbery, but it is a legal robbery. And you are the one holding the gun. Sheriff, she said bitterly. I thought you were a good man. I am trying to be, Caleb said. If you do not sell, they will seize it for tax debt next month. Silas is offering $50 an acre. It is low, but it is better than nothing. It is blood money, she spat. He wants the creek access. Tell him I will be ready with my shotgun. Caleb walked back to his horse, feeling the tin star on his chest weigh 10 pounds. He was sworn to uphold the law, but the law had been twisted into a strangling cord. He mounted his horse, looking toward the red cliffs in the distance. He was trapped. If he refused to serve the notices, Silas would replace him with someone like Vance, a hired gun, who would not ask the widow to sell, but would simply burn her barn down. He had to stay in power. He had to hold the line until they could prove Silas was a criminal, not just a ruthless businessman. 2 nights later, under the cover of a sky bruised with purple clouds, Caleb rode out of town. He did not take the main road. He doubled back through the dry wash, ensuring no one was following, before heading toward the foothills. Rowena Blake was waiting for him at the rendezvous point, an abandoned trapper's cabin halfway up the slope leading to the canyon. It was a desolate place, 3 walls and a sagging roof, smelling of pine needles and old wood rot. She had ridden a rented mule, an animal sturdy enough to carry her without complaint. She was wearing a heavy riding coat over her dress, her face pale in the moonlight. "You came," Caleb said, dismounting. "I said I would," Rowena replied. She was shivering slightly, though whether from cold or nerves, he could not tell. A shadow detached itself from the trees. Red Hawk stepped into the clearing, his movement silent. He carried a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. "The eyes of the wolf are everywhere," Red Hawk said without preamble. "We must be quick." They entered the cabin. Caleb lit a small lantern, keeping the flame low. The light cast long, dancing shadows on the rough-hewn logs. "Show him," Red Hawk said to Rowena. Rowena reached into her coat and pulled out a packet of letters. Her hands were steady as she unfolded the crisp, yellowed paper. "This is the last letter Clara sent me," Rowena said. "Read the 3rd paragraph." Caleb took the letter. He squinted in the dim light. "The survey maps in the town hall are wrong. Rowena, they show the canyon as solid granite, but I found the old Spanish markers near the creek. There are veins of ore running through the north wall silver. Maybe even gold. Silas knows. I saw his foreman, Vance, moving markers in the night. Or," Caleb murmured, "that is why he needs the railroad to go through the canyon. He is not just building a bridge. He is building a mine shaft disguised as a tunnel." "And this," Red Hawk said, placing his bundle on the rotting table. He unwrapped it to reveal a charred wooden crate slat and a torn piece of heavy canvas fabric. "I found this on the screen below the place where the woman Clara fell," Red Hawk said. He pointed to the wood. It was stamped with a faint black marking, "Danger Explosives, property of SC Mining." "SC," Caleb read. "Silas Crow." "And the cloth?" Rowena asked, touching the jagged scrap. "It is from a saddlebag," Caleb said, recognizing the stitching. "Vance rides a roan with bags like this. I saw him patching one last week. He said he snagged it on a cactus." "He snagged it on the rock when he pushed her," Red Hawk said, his voice cold and flat. "Or when he planted the charge to make the rock slide look natural." Caleb ran a hand over his face. "This is it, motive and means, but a piece of cloth and a letter are not enough for a judge in Santa Fe. We need to catch him in the act." "He is moving fast," Red Hawk warned. "My scouts say wagons are moving toward the canyon at night. Heavy wagons, more explosives. He is going to blow the face of the cliff," Caleb realized. "He will claim it is necessary for the railroad grade. Once the rock is open, he will discover the silver and claim rights to it." "And destroy the ancestral carvings," Red Hawk added. "If he blows that wall, the history of my people turns to dust." The wind outside howled, rattling the loose shingles. Thunder rumbled. Closer this time. "I must go," Red Hawk said. "I need to move my people away from the lower valley. If he uses that much powder, the slide will be massive." "Be careful, brother," Caleb said. Red Hawk nodded to Rowena. "Stand strong. Woman of iron." He vanished into the night, leaving Caleb and Rowena alone in the small, flickering circle of light. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees in the last hour. The storm front was pushing the heat away with aggressive force. Rowena hugged her coat tighter around herself, her teeth beginning to chatter. "You are freezing," Caleb said. He moved to the corner where an old, moth-eaten blanket lay on a crate. He shook it out. "It is not much, but it is dry." He sat on the only bench, a sturdy log split in half, and motioned for her to join him. "Come here. Body heat is the only fire we can risk." Rowena hesitated. The social rules she had been raised with screamed that this was improper. A single woman, a man, a dark cabin. But the cold was biting through her layers, and the look in Caleb's eyes was not predatory. It was inviting. She sat down next to him. He was warm, radiating heat like a wood stove. He wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and then pulled the ends around himself, cocooning them together. They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the wind. "My father used to say I was too much to handle," Rowena said softly, her voice barely audible over the storm. "He said I took up the space of 2 useful sons. When I sat on the buckboard, it tilted. He made sure I knew it." Caleb shifted, his arm coming up to rest along the wall behind her, effectively embracing her. "Your father sounds like a man who measured the wrong things." "It is hard to forget, though," she admitted. "When the whole world tells you that you are wrong, that your very existence is an inconvenience, you start to believe it. Tonight, sitting here with you, I feel like I am putting you in danger. Maybe if you were not helping the big seamstress, Silas would leave you alone." Caleb turned his head. His face was inches from hers. "Rowena, look at me." She turned. His gray eyes were dark, searching. "I was the runt of the litter," Caleb said. "My brothers were giants. They thrashed me daily. I learned to be fast because I could not be strong. I spent my whole life trying to prove I was tough enough." He moved his hand, placing it firmly on the curve of her hip, his fingers spreading over the heavy wool of her dress. "You are solid," he whispered. "You are real. When the shooting started, you were the only rock in the street. I do not want a willow branch that snaps in the wind. I want you." Rowena's breath caught. His hand on her hip felt heavy and grounding. It was not a groping touch. It was a claim. He was anchoring her to the earth, and to him. "Caleb," she breathed. "I choose you," he said, his voice rough. "Not despite who you are, because of who you are. I do not want the society version of a woman. I want the woman who dragged me behind a water trough." He leaned in. Rowena did not pull back. She closed her eyes, and his lips met hers. It was not the chaste peck of a courtship novel. It was a slow, deep kiss, tasting of coffee and urgency. Caleb's hand tightened on her waist, pulling her flush against him. Rowena felt a sound vibrate in her throat, not a whimper, but a sigh of relief. For the first time, she did not feel too big. She felt encompassed. She felt held. They broke apart slowly, foreheads resting against each other. "We have to stop him," Rowena whispered. "For Clara. For Red Hawk. For us." "We will," Caleb promised. "But first, we have to survive the town." Survival, as it turned out, was harder in the daylight. Silas Crow was not a man to let a grudge cool. He knew he could not simply shoot the sheriff again without drawing federal attention. So, he chose a weapon far more effective in a small-town shame. The rumors started 2 days after the meeting in the cabin. They began in the saloon, whispered by men on Silas's payroll, and spread to the church pews and the laundry lines. "She is not a seamstress. She is a camp follower who got too old for the army tents. I heard she is in debt to the sheriff, and she is paying him in trade, if you catch my meaning. A woman that size, she must have bewildered the poor boy with some Eastern potion." Rowena stood behind the counter of Blake's stitchery, staring at the door. It was Tuesday. Usually, Mrs. Higgins brought her mending on Tuesdays. The street was busy, but no one stopped. Women walked by, glancing at the window and then turning their heads sharply away, whispering behind gloved hands. Even Ruby did not come. A young girl from the saloon had slipped a note under the door early that morning. "Silas's men are watching who comes in. They beat up old man Miller for renting to you. Said he tripped. We cannot come today. Honey, stay safe." Rowena crushed the note in her hand. Old Miller, beaten. Because of her, the bell jingled. Rowena looked up, hope flaring. It was not a customer. It was Silas Crow's personal assistant, a Weasley man named Mr. Finch. He stood in the doorway, holding a handkerchief to his nose as if the shop smelled. "Miss Blake," Finch simpered. "Mr. Crow asked me to deliver a message. He is concerned about the moral character of the business district. He feels that your establishment is attracting an undesirable element. I sew dresses, Mr. Finch," Rowena said, her voice steady though her knees shook. "And you entertain the sheriff at all hours," Finch said, his eyes gleaming with malice. "People talk. It is becoming a scandal. Mr. Crow suggests that perhaps you would be happier elsewhere. He is willing to buy out your lease. He will even pay for a ticket back east. One way, of course. Get out, Rowena said. Think about it. Finch sneered. Before the sheriff loses his star because he is too busy exploring the vast wilderness of your company. He left, slamming the door. Rowena sank into her chair. The fight drained out of her. Was he right? Was she destroying Caleb if she left? Would Silas back off? She looked at her reflection in the small mirror. A big freight. A burden. That was all she had ever been. Maybe she was just being selfish. Staying here, playing at being a hero while good men like Miller bled and Caleb risked his career. Tears, hot and heavy, spilled down her cheeks. She reached for her trunk. Maybe it was time to pack. The town hall meeting that Friday was mandatory. Silas had called it to discuss the grand railroad future. The wooden benches of the church, which doubled as the hall, were packed. Rowena sat in the very back, hidden in the shadows. She had intended to leave on the morning stage, but the stage had been canceled due to the washed-out roads. She felt like a ghost haunting her own funeral. Silas stood at the pulpit, looking benevolent and rich. Progress, Silas boomed, requires sacrifice. It requires order, and it requires leadership that is focused on the future, not distracted by personal appetites. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. Heads turned to look at Caleb, who stood by the wall, arms crossed. We need a sheriff who is fully committed to the law. Silas continued smoothly. Not one who is compromised by an infatuation with transient strangers of questionable reputation. I propose a vote of no confidence in Sheriff Ward. A murmur ran through the crowd. It was the moment Silas had engineered. Caleb pushed off the wall. His boots clicked loudly on the floorboards as he walked down the center aisle. He did not look at Silas. He looked at the people. Questionable reputation, Caleb repeated, his voice calm. He stopped in the middle of the room. That is an interesting choice of words. Mr. Crow. He turned to Mrs. Higgins. Mary, who fixed your daughter's confirmation dress when you could not afford new fabric. Mrs. Higgins looked down, her face red. Miss Blake did, she whispered. Caleb turned to a miner in the second row. John, who pulled the stitch in your arm when the doctor was too drunk to hold a needle. The seamstress, the man mumbled. Caleb turned to face the room, his voice rising. And who stood in the street last week, when bullets were flying, and saved my life while the rest of you were hiding under your beds? He pointed a finger at the back of the room, directly at Rowena. You call her a stranger. You call her names because she does not look like the pictures in your fashion magazines. But I tell you, this Rowena Blake has more honor in her sewing basket than Silas Crow has in his entire bank vault. This is out of order, Silas shouted, slamming his hand on the pulpit. The sheriff is emotionally unstable. I am not unstable, Caleb said, his voice icy. I am in love, and I am not ashamed of it. I am proud to stand beside a woman who has the courage to be herself in a town of cowards. He looked directly at Rowena. I am standing with her. If you want my badge because of that, come and take it. The silence was absolute. No one moved. No one dared to be the first to stand against the man who had just stared down the town's tyrant. Rowena felt her heart expanding, pushing against her ribs until it hurt. He had said it, in front of God and everyone, in love. The spell was broken by the sound of slow, sarcastic clapping. Silas Crow was applauding. Very touching, Silas sneered. Truly, a romance for the ages. But love does not stop the railroad. Sheriff, and love does not pay the taxes. He signaled to Vance, who was standing by the door. Vance nodded and slipped out. The retribution was swift. An hour after the meeting, a scream echoed from the alley behind the bakery. Caleb and Rowena ran toward the sound. They found the baker, a man who had nodded in agreement with Caleb during the meeting, lying in the mud. His shop window was smashed, and his arm was broken. He said it was a warning. The baker gasped, clutching his arm. He said, anyone who stands with the sheriff pays the price. Caleb knelt, his face turning to stone. "Who did this? Tom?" "Vance," the baker wept. "And he said the seamstress is next." Caleb stood up. He looked at Rowena. The tenderness from the cabin was gone, replaced by the cold, hard look of a gunman. "Go to your room," he ordered. "Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone but me." "Caleb, do not—" Rowena started, terrified by the look in his eyes. "I have to follow the law," Caleb said, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "But Silas is pushing me to a place where the law ends." Just then, a clap of thunder shook the ground, louder than any before. The sky opened up. The storm had arrived. Rain began to fall in sheets, turning the dusty street into mud in seconds. Through the curtain of rain, a figure appeared, running toward them. It was a young native boy, breathless and soaked. He skidded to a halt in front of Caleb. "Sheriff," the boy gasped. "Red Hawk sent me. The wagons. They are at the canyon. They are not waiting for the morning. They are setting the charges now." Rowena grabbed Caleb's arm. "The storm covers the sound," she realized. "He is going to blow the cliff tonight. He is going to bury the evidence and the markers in the middle of the chaos. He is going to kill anyone in that valley," Caleb said. "And he will claim it was a landslide caused by the rain." He looked at Rowena. The doubt was gone from her eyes. She was no longer the woman who wanted to pack her trunk. She was the woman who had carried the bolt of cloth like a feather. "We have to go," Rowena said. "Now?" "It is suicide," Caleb said. "It is a storm. Rowena. And Vance has 20 men. "Then it is a good thing we are not going alone," she said. "Get the horses. I will get my rifle." Caleb looked at her, and for a brief second, he smiled. It was a grim, dangerous smile. "Yes, ma'am," he said. The wind howled through dustwater, tearing down the Blake Stitchery sign from above the door. It clattered into the mud, but Rowena did not look back. She was done with signs. It was time for iron. The storm that hammered the canyon of the ancestors was not merely weather. It was a biblical judgment. The sky had turned the color of a bruised plum, split intermittently by veins of lightning that illuminated the jagged teeth of the red cliffs. Rain fell in sheets so heavy they felt like gravel against the skin, turning the ancient dust of the trail into a slurry of treacherous, sucking mud. High on the northern ridge, sheltered by a shallow overhang of sandstone, Silas Crow checked his pocket watch. He could barely see the face of it in the gloom, but a flash of lightning revealed the time. It was nearly midnight. "Hurry it up!" Silas roared over the thunder. He clutched his leather valise against his chest as if it were a child. Inside lay the future of the territory, the forged survey maps, the bribe schedules for the territorial governor, and the contract that would sign over the mineral rights of this canyon to his own shell company the moment the rock face was obliterated. Below him, struggling in the mud, 3 of his hired men were wrestling a heavy crate of dynamite toward the drilling holes they had bored into the cliffside earlier that week. The fuse wire trailed behind them like a black snake. "Boss, the rain is soaking the fuses," one man shouted, his hat pulled low against the deluge. "We should wait for it to pass." "We do not wait," Silas screamed back, his voice shrill. "We blew it tonight. The storm covers the noise. By morning, I want this canyon filled with rubble. If the fuse is wet, cut it short and light it closer. Just get it done." He did not care if the men died in the blast. Men were replaceable, like horses or pencils. Opportunity, however, was rare. Half a mile down the trail, the wind howled with such ferocity that it threatened to peel the skin from the bone. Rowena Blake drove her knees into the flanks of her mule, a sturdy beast named Blackjack that was currently the only thing keeping her from sliding 200 feet into the churning river below. The path was narrow, barely wide enough for a single rider. To her left was the solid wall of the canyon. To her right, the abyss. Every time the lightning flashed, Rowena saw the drop. It made her stomach turn over, a sickening lurch of vertigo that tasted of bile. "Stay close to the wall," Caleb shouted from ahead. He was riding his roan, his hat pulled down tight, his bad shoulder hunched against the driving rain. Rowena leaned forward, burying her face in the mule's coarse mane. The wind struck her broadside, a lighter woman. She realized, with a sudden, jolting clarity, might have been swept off the saddle. A girl of slight frame would have been a leaf in this gale, but Rowena was solid. Her weight, the very thing that had drawn the town's mockery, was now acting as an anchor. She was heavy enough to keep the mule grounded. She was a fortress against the wind. "I am here!" she shouted into the storm, though the wind snatched the words away. "I am not moving." Ahead of them, Red Hawk raised a fist. He slid off his paint horse, moving with the fluid grace of water flowing over stone. He signaled for Caleb and Rowena to dismount. "They are ahead," Red Hawk said, his voice low but carrying clearly in a lull between thunderclaps. "I smell the sulfur. They are priming the charges." "How many?" Caleb asked, drawing his Winchester rifle from its leather scabbard. 5 men visible. Silas is on the upper ledge. The shooter, Vance, is guarding the switchback." "Vance is mine," Caleb said, his eyes hard. "Red Hawk, you take the men at the charges. Do not let them light that fuse." "And me?" Rowena asked, checking the load in the shotgun Caleb had given her. Her hands were wet and shaking, but her grip was firm. "You stay back," Caleb started. "No," Rowena interrupted. "I am not staying back. If they see you, they will try to detonate early. You need a distraction, or you need someone to watch the rear." Caleb looked at her. Rain dripped from the brim of his hat onto his nose. He saw the set of her jaw, the fierce determination in her eyes. "Watch the trail behind us," Caleb said. "Silas always keeps a dog at the back door." They split up. Red Hawk vanished into the rocks, climbing a vertical face that looked impossible to scale. Caleb moved low, crouching against the canyon wall, creeping toward the switchback where Vance waited. Rowena stood alone in the dark, the shotgun heavy in her arms. The thunder crashed again, shaking the very ground beneath her boots. She was terrified. She was cold, but she was not useless. The ambush began not with a shout, but with a whisper of air. On the lower drilling platform, one of Silas's men reached for a lucifer match to light the fuse. Suddenly, a feathered shaft bloomed from his shoulder. He gasped, dropping the match into the mud, and spun around. Red Hawk dropped from the ledge above, ending in the center of the group. He did not use a gun. The flash would give away his position. He used his bow as a stave, striking with brutal efficiency. He swept the legs of the second man, sending him sprawling into the mud. The third man fumbled for his pistol, but Red Hawk was already there, kicking the weapon from his hand and delivering a palm strike to the man's chest that left him gasping for air. It was a dance of shadows and violence, illuminated by stroboscopic flashes of lightning. 50 yards up the trail, the crack of a rifle cut through the storm. Caleb threw himself flat against the rock as a bullet chipped the stone inches from his ear. Vance was good. He was perched behind a boulder on the high ground, pinning Caleb down. "Come out, Sheriff," Vance shouted, his voice taunting. "I will make it quick." Just like I did for the seamstress's cousin. The mention of Clara sent a bolt of hot rage through Caleb. He rolled to his left, splashing through a puddle, and fired blindly over the lip of the rock. He needed to move. If he stayed here, Vance would flank him. Caleb stood up, exposing himself to fire. He squeezed the trigger, working the lever of his Winchester with a lightning speed. Bang! Crank! Bang! Crank! He laid down a wall of lead that forced Vance to duck. While Vance was suppressed, Caleb charged. He ran up the slick rock, his boots slipping, his wounded shoulders screaming in protest. Vance popped up to fire, but Caleb was closer than he expected. Caleb swung the stock of his rifle, connecting with Vance's wrist. The outlaw's gun went spinning over the edge. Vance pulled a knife. They grappled on the narrow ledge, the rain making every hold slippery. Vance was stronger, but Caleb was fighting for something more than money. He slammed Vance against the canyon wall, driving his knee into the man's gut, then struck him hard on the temple with his forearm. Vance crumpled, sliding down the rock until he hit a stopper stone. Caleb stood over him, chest heaving. "That was for Clara," he rasped. Rowena heard the fighting ahead, but she could not move to help. Her own nightmare had just stepped out from behind a pile of scree. It was Jeb, the ranch hand who had mocked her on her first day, and again at the saloon. He held a pistol loosely in his hand, a cruel grin plastered on his wet face. "Well, look at this," Jeb sneered, shouting to be heard over the wind. "If it isn't the big freight. I told Silas you would be too heavy for the mule. Surprised you made it up the hill without causing a landslide yourself." Rowena raised the shotgun, but Jeb was faster. He fired a shot into the ground at her feet. She flinched, and he laughed. "Drop it, cow," Jeb ordered, "or the next one goes in your gut." Although it might take a cannonball to get through all that blubber, Rowena lowered the shotgun slowly. She placed it on the ground. "That is a good girl," Jeb said, stepping closer. "Now turn around. I am going to tie you up and leave you here. When the cliff blows, you can be part of the foundation." He was close now. Too close. He looked at her with pure contempt. Dismissing her as a threat because of her size, he saw mass, but he did not see muscle. He saw weight, but he did not see momentum. Rowena saw the slick mud between them. She saw Jeb's weight resting on his back heels, confident and lazy. "I am not a cow," Rowena said, her voice low and steady. "I am a landslide." She did not run away. She ran at him. She launched herself forward with explosive force. Jeb's eyes widened in shock. He tried to bring the gun up, but he was too slow. Rowena slammed into him. It was simple physics. 200 pounds of determined woman moving at speed against 160 pounds of surprised drunkard. The impact knocked the air out of his lungs with a sound like a bursting bellows. Rowena did not stop. She used her weight to drive him backward, her shoulder buried in his chest. They hit the muddy slope together. They rolled. The world became a blur of wet earth, sky, and pain. Rowena felt rocks scraping her cheek, felt the hard angles of Jeb's pistol digging into her ribs, but she kept her weight on him. She pinned him to the ground as they slid, pressing him into the mud. They came to a stop at the bottom of the dip. Jeb groaned, his head lolling back. He had cracked his skull against a stone on the way down. He was out cold. Rowena pushed herself up. She was covered in mud. Her dress was torn at the sleeve. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead. She spat a mouthful of grit onto the ground. She looked down at the unconscious man. "Heavy freight coming through," she whispered fiercely. She grabbed his gun, tucked it into her belt, and retrieved her shotgun. She began to climb toward the blast site. The scene at the drilling platform was a chaotic tableau. Red Hawk had subdued the men, but Silas Crow had retreated to the highest point of the excavation, a flat table of rock that jutted out over the river. He stood with his back to the abyss. In one hand, he held a Smith Wesson revolver. In the other, he clutched the detonator wire that ran down to the bundle of dynamite crates sitting precariously on the edge of the drilling hole. 20 feet away, Caleb emerged from the gloom, aiming his Winchester at Silas. "It is over, Silas," Caleb shouted. "Step away from the wire." "It is over when I say it is over," Silas screamed. His hair was plastered to his skull, his expensive suit ruined. He looked like a madman. "I own this town. I own this canyon. You think a sheriff and a savage can stop the future? Drop the gun. Silas," Caleb warned, taking a step forward. "Stay back." Silas raised the pistol, aiming it at the crate of explosives. "One shot, Sheriff. One bullet into that crate, and we all go to hell together. I will blow this ledge right off the mountain." Caleb froze. He could shoot Silas, but if Silas's finger twitched on the trigger as he fell, or if he pulled the detonator wire tight, the dynamite would blow. They were too close. The concussion alone would kill them. Red Hawk appeared on the flank, his bow drawn, but he held his fire. The angle was bad. If he missed the head, Silas would fire at the explosives. Rowena climbed onto the plateau. She saw the standoff. She saw Silas, crazed and desperate. She saw Caleb, helpless to act. And she saw the crate. The wooden crate of dynamite was sitting on a slick patch of granite, right at the precipice. It was heavy, packed with 50 sticks of blasting powder. Silas saw her. He sneered. "Ah, the seamstress. Come to watch the fireworks. Let it go, Silas, Rowena said, moving slowly to her right, away from Caleb. You have the papers in that bag, Caleb said, nodding at the valise at Silas's feet. The forgery, the fraud. We know about the silver. Silas, we know about Clara. Clara was a fool, Silas spat. She stood in the way of progress, just like you. He raised the gun higher. I'm going to count to 3. If you do not drop your weapons, I shoot the crate. 1. Caleb looked at Rowena. His eyes pleaded with her to run. Rowena looked at the crate. It was heavy, but she knew about moving heavy things. She knew about fulcrums and leverage. 2! Silas shouted. Rowena did not think. She acted. She dropped her shotgun and sprinted, not toward Silas, toward the crate. Rowena, no! Caleb screamed. Silas turned his gun toward her. Realizing too late what she intended, he fired. Rowena felt a searing line of fire tear through her upper left arm. It burned like a branding iron, but the momentum of her heavy body was already committed. She did not falter. She grit her teeth against the pain and threw her shoulder into the heavy wooden crate. She hit it with every ounce of strength she possessed. Her weight, the weight she had hated, the weight she had cursed, became a battering ram. The crate slid. It scraped across the wet granite with a screech, cleared the lip of the cliff, and plummeted into the darkness below. No! Silas shrieked. In the same second, the crate vanished. Red Hawk released his arrow. The shaft took Silas in the right forearm. He screamed, dropping the pistol. The gun skittered away over the wet rock. The detonator wire, still clutched in Silas's other hand, jerked tight as the crate fell. The heavy box reached the end of the slack. The sudden weight yanked Silas forward. He stumbled, his boots slipping on the slick moss. Caleb holstered his rifle and lunged. He grabbed Silas by the collar of his coat just as the man went over the edge. Rowena collapsed on the wet rock, clutching her bleeding arm. She watched, gasping for breath, as Caleb strained to hold the struggling tycoon. Silas dangled over the abyss, his feet kicking at empty air. The river roared hundreds of feet below. The crate of dynamite had likely been swept away by the current instantly, the fuse extinguished by the river. Pull me up, Silas begged, his arrogance washed away by terror. I will give you anything, I will give you the bank, I will give you mine. Caleb looked down at him. The rain ran down Caleb's face, mixing with the blood from a cut on his cheek. I do not want your money. Silas, I want justice. You cannot let me drop, Silas cried. You are the law. I am, Caleb said, his muscles straining. He began to haul Silas up. Even now, after everything, Caleb Ward would not murder a man in cold blood. But Silas was not done. His eyes darted to his boot, where he kept a hideout knife. With his free hand, the one Red Hawk had pinned with an arrow, he fumbled for the blade. He winced in agony, but managed to pull the small dagger. You fool, Silas hissed. He slashed at Caleb's wrist. Caleb recoiled, letting go instinctively as the blade sliced his forearm. Silas Crow fell backward into the dark. He did not scream. He just laughed a short, bitter bark of sound. You will not keep this town. Sheriff, it eats the weak. His voice was swallowed by the thunder. A moment later, there was no sound of impact, only the roar of the river. Rowena lay on the rock, the rain washing the blood from her arm. Caleb was beside her in an instant, ripping his scarf off to bind her wound. You are crazy, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. You ran right into a bullet. I pushed the crate, Rowena gasped, her teeth chattering from shock. It was heavy. I had to be heavier. You were perfect, Caleb said. He kissed her forehead, heedless of the mud and blood. You were absolutely perfect. Red Hawk joined them. He looked over the edge of the cliff. The river has him. The spirits have claimed their due. Suddenly, a deep, grinding rumble shook the earth beneath them. It was not thunder. It was the cliff itself. The blast holes, Red Hawk shouted. The rain has destabilized the drilling shafts. The rock is shearing. The ledge they were standing on groaned. A crack appeared in the granite, widening rapidly. Move, Caleb yelled. He hauled Rowena to her feet. They ran back toward the trail. Behind them, a massive section of the cliff face, weakened by Silas's drilling and the torrential rain, sheared off. Tons of rock crashed down into the river below with a sound that deafened the storm. Water sprayed up, a geyser of mud and foam. The river, dammed momentarily by the debris, surged upward, flooding the lower trail. "The horses!" Rowena cried. "Leave them," Caleb ordered. "Climb to the high ground." Red Hawk led the way, scrambling up a steep chimney of rock. He reached down, grabbing Caleb's good arm. Caleb reached down and grabbed Rowena's hand. "Pull!" Caleb shouted. Rowena dug her boots into the crevices. Her arm throbbed with agony. But she pushed. Caleb pulled. Red Hawk anchored them both. They hauled themselves onto a wide, stable shelf of rock just as the lower trail was swallowed by the rising floodwaters. They collapsed there, huddled together against the canyon wall. They were soaked, bleeding, and exhausted. Below them, the river raged, carrying away the debris of Silas's ambition. The crate of dynamite, the drilling equipment, the body of the tycoon, all of it was gone, washed clean by the storm. Rowena leaned her head back against the stone. She looked at her arm. The bullet had passed through the fleshy part of her bicep. It was painful, but it would heal. She looked at Caleb. He was staring at her with a look of awe.
"We did it,"
she whispered.
"You did it,"
Caleb said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sodden leather object. It was Silas's valise. "I grabbed it when he fell. We have the proof, the maps, the contracts, everything." Red Hawk nodded slowly. "The wolf is dead. The canyon stands." Rowena closed her eyes. She felt the solid rock beneath her. She felt the weight of her own body, heavy and alive. She had not floated away. She had not broken. She had been the stone that broke the wave. For the first time in her life, Rowena Blake did not want to be an ounce lighter. She was exactly enough. The floodwaters receded from the canyon of the ancestors, leaving behind a scar of raw land and the shattered remnants of Silas Crow's ambition. The sun returned to dust water, baking the mud back into hard pan. But the town that emerged from the storm was not the same one that had shuttered its windows against the rain. In the sheriff's office, the mood was grim but industrious. Caleb Ward sat at his desk, his left arm still stiff, his right hand sorting through the sodden contents of the leather valise that had been recovered from the cliff edge. The papers were water-stained, the ink running in places, but the damning words were legible enough. Mr. Sterling, the railroad representative, stood on the other side of the desk. He looked diminished without Silas Crow's expensive brandy in his hand. He held his hat by the brim, rotating it nervously. "You understand, Sheriff," Sterling said, his voice thin, "that the company had no knowledge of Mr. Crow's extracurricular methods. We assumed he had legal title to the canyon land. Assumptions are dangerous things. Mr. Sterling," Caleb said, not looking up from a map that showed the falsified survey lines. "This map shows a clear grade where there is solid granite. And this letter," he tapped a piece of parchment, "is an order for 50 cases of high-explosive dynamite to be used for landscaping purposes 3 days before the permits were even filed." Sterling cleared his throat. "Yes, well, given the irregular nature of the partnership and the unfortunate demise of Mr. Crow, the company has decided to suspend the dust water expansion project indefinitely. We cannot build on contested land, nor can we do business with a ghost." "You mean you cannot do business without a criminal to do your dirty work?" Caleb corrected calmly. Sterling bristled but said nothing. He placed a document on the desk. "This is the official withdrawal. The company relinquishes all claims to the southern route. We will bypass Dustwater and head north toward Santa Fe." "Good," Caleb said. "Take your surveyors with you, and tell your board of directors that the next time they want to cut through this territory, they should ask the people who live here first." Sterling put his hat on and left, the spurs on his boots jingling with a hollow sound. With the collapse of the railroad deal, the power structure of Dustwater began to fracture. Vance and the hired guns who had terrorized the town saw the writing on the wall. Without Silas to pay their wages, and with the sheriff proving himself to be unkillable, they melted away into the desert like frost under the morning sun. 2 of the men who had helped plant the explosives were arrested by Caleb's deputy, caught trying to steal horses from the livery to aid their escape. They were currently sitting in the 2 cells in the back, singing mournful songs about regret. But the legal victory was the easy part. Social reckoning was a slower, more painful process. Rowena Blake sat in the window of her shop. Her left arm was bound in a clean white sling, the bullet wound throbbing with a dull, rhythmic ache that matched the beat of her heart. The sign Blake Stitchery had been retrieved from the mud, cleaned, and rehung by old man Miller himself, who had refused to let her pay for the nails. The bell above the door jingled. Rowena tensed instinctively. She expected the silence of shunning, or perhaps a new wave of insults now that her protector was busy with the law. Instead, a young woman stepped inside. It was Sarah, the baker's wife, a woman who had once crossed the street to avoid walking in Rowena's shadow. She held a bundle of white lace in her arms, her face flushed with a mixture of heat and embarrassment. "Good morning, Miss Blake," Sarah said, her voice small. "Mrs. Baker," Rowena replied evenly. "How can I help you?" Sarah hesitated, clutching the lace. "It is my sister's wedding dress. She is marrying the blacksmith's son next month. The hem, it was torn in the storm. The mud ruined the train. We heard. That is, we know you can work miracles with ruined things." Rowena looked at the woman. She saw the hesitation, the fear of social judgment warring with necessity. "Put it on the counter," Rowena said gently. "Let me see." Sarah laid the dress out, as Rowena inspected the damage with her good hand. Sarah spoke again, the words rushing out in a breathless tumble. "I wanted to come sooner," Sarah admitted, tears pricking her eyes. "When Silas's men were threatening people, I was scared. I was afraid that if I was nice to you, they would laugh at me too. They called you names, terrible names." Rowena smoothed the silk. "I heard them." "I know," Sarah whispered. "But then, we heard what you did, at the canyon. My husband said you pushed a crate of dynamite off the cliff with your bare hands. He said if you had not done that, the rock slide would have dammed the river and flooded the whole lower valley. My house is in that valley. My baby was sleeping in his crib." She looked up at Rowena, her eyes wide and sincere. "I realized that while I was worrying about being laughed at, you were worrying about saving my son. I am ashamed, Miss Blake, and I am grateful." Rowena felt a lump form in her throat. For 20 years, her size had been a target. Now, for the first time, it was being acknowledged as the vessel of her strength. "It was a heavy crate," Rowena said, her voice thick. "I suppose it was fortunate I had the weight to move it." "It was a miracle," Sarah corrected firmly. "Will you fix the dress, please? We will pay you whatever you ask." "I will fix it," Rowena said. "And tell your sister congratulations." That afternoon, 3 more women came. One brought a quilt, another a Sunday bonnet. They did not speak of the canyon, but they paid in full, and they looked her in the eye. The laughter had stopped. It was replaced by a clumsy, awkward respect. Rowena found it harder to navigate than the cruelty. She knew how to armor herself against insults. She did not yet know how to open herself to gratitude without feeling like an imposter. High in the red rocks, the mood was equally somber. The elders of the tribe sat in a circle around the fire, passing a pipe. Red Hawk sat among them, his face impassive, though his side was bandaged where a rock splinter had grazed him during the slide. "The iron horse is gone," an elder named Gray Cloud said, looking at the smoke rising into the clear air. "The canyon is quiet." "For now," Red Hawk replied. "The white man is like the river. You can turn him aside for a season, but he always seeks the lowest ground. They will come back. Maybe not this year, maybe not the next, but they will come." "You fought beside the sheriff," another elder observed, his tone neutral but probing. "You spilled blood for the town that hates us." "I fought for the land," Red Hawk said. "And the sheriff, he is different. He listens." And the woman, the one who sows, she has the spirit of a bear. She bled for this ground. Gray Cloud nodded slowly. Then we have peace for a time. But do not trust too deeply. Red Hawk, the memory of the white man is short, while his greed is long. I know, Red Hawk said. He looked down toward the distant cluster of buildings that was Dustwater. I do not trust their memory. I trust their fear. And right now, they fear the mountain enough to leave us be. The peace in Dustwater was fragile. While the common folk were turning toward gratitude, the town council was scrambling to cover their own complicity. They had supported Silas Crow. They had passed his taxes. They had looked the other way when his men beat the baker. Now that Silas was dead and his fraud exposed, they needed a scapegoat to distract from their own incompetence. Rumors began to swirl like dust devils. The sheriff is too reckless. He provoked a businessman and caused a riot. We need a steady hand, an older man, someone conservative, someone who does not fraternize with native warriors and scandalous women. Rowena heard the whispers in the general store. She saw the cold looks the mayor gave Caleb when they passed in the street, one evening, a week after the explosion. Rowena and Caleb sat on the small porch of the house she was now renting, a proper house with 2 rooms, though she still used the shop for work. The night was clear. The Milky Way, a splash of milk across the obsidian sky. Caleb looked tired. The lines around his eyes were deeper. He was cleaning his revolver. The rhythmic click-clack of the cylinder, the only sound in the night. They are going to try to fire you, Rowena said softly into the darkness. Caleb did not stop cleaning the gun. I know, the mayor called a closed session for tomorrow night. They are calling it a review of departmental conduct. It is because of me, Rowena said. The thought had been eating at her for days. If you had not stood up for me in the meeting, if you were not seen walking with me, they would not have ammunition. They are using me to paint you as reckless. Caleb stopped. He set the gun down on the small table. Rowena, it is true, she insisted, turning to look at him. I am a distraction. Caleb, I am a woman who brawls in the mud. I am not the kind of woman a sheriff settles down with if he wants to keep his badge. Maybe I should go to Santa Fe, just for a while, until things settle down. Is that what you want? Caleb asked, his voice dangerously quiet. To go to Santa Fe? No, Rowena said, her voice cracking. I want to stay here. I want to sew curtains for this house. I want to sit on this porch with you every night, but I do not want to be the heavy thing that drags you down. I have spent my whole life being a burden. Caleb, I will not be one to you. Caleb stood up. He crossed the small distance between them and knelt by her chair, ignoring the stiffness in his knees. He took her good hand in both of his. Listen to me, he said, and his gray eyes were fierce. You think you are the reason they want to fire me? You are wrong. They want to fire me because I remind them of their own cowardice. They looked at Silas and saw money. I looked at him and saw a snake. That embarrasses them. He squeezed her hand. And as for being a burden, Rowena, look at me. Before you came to town, I was just a hired gun with a badge. I drank too much. I slept too little. I let Silas push me around because I thought it was the only way to keep the peace. You changed that. I just pushed a crate, she whispered. You pushed me, Caleb said. You showed me that standing your ground is worth the pain. You are not the weight that drags me down. Rowena, you are the anchor that keeps me from drifting away. You are the reason I deserve this badge. If I lose it because I love you, then it is a cheap piece of tin and I do not want it. Rowena looked at him, seeing the absolute truth in his face, the shame that had dogged her since childhood. The voice of her father saying she was too much finally went silent. I am not hiding anymore, Rowena said, her voice gaining strength. I am not going to Santa Fe. Good, Caleb smiled, leaning his forehead against hers. Because I need someone to help me fight the council tomorrow, and I hear you are very good at fighting bullies. I do not punch mayors, Rowena said with a wet laugh. We will see how the meeting goes. Caleb grinned. The town hall meeting was held in the church, the air smelling of beeswax and judgment. 5 men sat at the long table at the front. The mayor, the banker who had taken over for Silas, and 3 prominent ranchers. They looked serious, self-important, and eager to be done with the unpleasant business of firing a hero. Caleb stood in the center of the aisle. He was in his dress uniform, his boots polished, his star gleaming. He stood alone. Rowena sat in the first pew, her head high, wearing the blue silk dress she had mended herself. "Sheriff Ward," the mayor began, adjusting his spectacles, "this council recognizes your physical bravery during the incident at the canyon. However, we have grave concerns regarding your judgment." "Judgment regarding what?" Mayor Caleb asked coolly. "Regarding the stability of the town," the banker interjected. "You openly antagonized our largest investor. You engaged in a shootout that destroyed potential mining assets, and you have aligned yourself with elements that are disruptive to the social order." He glanced pointedly at Rowena. "By disruptive elements, do you mean the woman who stopped the explosion?" Caleb asked. "Or do you mean the native tribe whose land you were trying to steal?" "We are not here to discuss politics," the mayor snapped. "We are here to discuss competence. We feel that Dustwater needs a sheriff who represents the values of the community, a man of traditional standing." "I see," Caleb said. "You want a sheriff who will look the other way when you sign illegal contracts." "That is enough," one of the ranchers shouted. "We are putting it to a vote. All those in favor of relieving Sheriff Ward of his duties." The heavy oak doors of the church swung open with a groan. Every head turned. Standing in the doorway was Red Hawk. He was not dressed for war, but he was imposing nonetheless. He wore a clean buckskin tunic and a blanket draped over one shoulder. Behind him stood 2 other warriors, silent and watchful. The mayor stood up, sputtering. You cannot be here. This is a closed session. No Indians allowed." Red Hawk walked down the aisle. He moved with a silence that made the floorboards seem to hold their breath. He stopped beside Caleb. He did not look at the sheriff. He looked at the council. "I speak," Red Hawk said. His English was slow, deliberate, each word dropping like a stone into a pond. "This is highly irregular," the banker squeaked. "I speak," Red Hawk repeated, louder this time. "You talk of values. You talk of safety." He pointed a finger at the mayor. 5 winters ago, my brother's daughter, she wandered from the camp. The snow came. White men found her. They wanted to sell her to the traders in the south. The room was dead silent. Sheriff Ward found them. Red Hawk continued. He did not know she was the daughter of a chief. He only knew she was a child. He fought 3 men. He took a knife in the leg. He brought her back to the snow line. He left her where we could find her. Red Hawk lowered his hand. "You say he is the enemy of the town. I say he is the only reason the arrows did not fly 5 winters ago. I say he is the only reason my warriors did not burn this church when Silas Crow tried to blow up the mountain." He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the townspeople who had gathered to watch. "You want a new sheriff?" Red Hawk asked. "Good. Get a new sheriff. But know this. The peace between the Red Rocks and the Dustwater ends the day this man leaves." He turned and walked out, his warriors following him. The doors swung shut. The silence in the church was heavy, suffocating. The mayor looked at the banker. The banker looked at his shoes. The threat was clear. Caleb Ward was the only thing standing between Dustwater and a war they could not win. The mayor cleared his throat. He looked pale. "Well, that was unexpected, I believe," Caleb said, breaking the silence. "That we were voting." The mayor looked at the crowd. He saw Sarah, the baker's wife, nodding at Caleb. He saw Old Man Miller glaring at the council. He saw the fear in the eyes of the ranchers who knew what an Indian war would do to their herds. "Perhaps," the mayor said weakly, "we have been hasty. In light of the diplomatic complexities, perhaps a dismissal is not necessary. However," the banker added quickly, trying to save face, "we cannot ignore the volatility. Sheriff, we will retain you, but you are on probation. 1 year of absolute peace, no shootouts, no explosions. If you can keep dust water boring for 12 months, the badge stays yours permanently. Caleb looked at Rowena. She smiled a small, proud smile that lit up her face. 1 year of boring, Caleb said. I think I can manage that. Then it is settled, the mayor said, banging his gavel quickly as if afraid Red Hawk might come back. The meeting was adjourned. Outside the church, the night air was cool and sweet. Caleb and Rowena walked down the steps together. The town was quiet. The saloon was open, but the piano was playing a soft waltz, not a raucous jig. Probation, Caleb chuckled, shaking his head. I feel like a schoolboy. A schoolboy who keeps the peace, Rowena said, taking his arm. Her sling shone white in the moonlight. 1 year, Caleb mused. Do you think we can stay out of trouble for 1 year? Rowena looked at the town. It was still dusty. It was still hard. But the fear was gone. The shadow of Silas Crow had lifted. We can try, Rowena said. I have a lot of sewing to do. Sarah wants lace on the sleeves. And Mrs. Higgins wants a new quilt. And I have a town to patrol, Caleb said. But tonight I think the town can look after itself. They reached the porch of her house. Caleb stopped and turned to her. He was careful with her injured arm, placing his hand gently on her shoulder. You know, he said softly, Red Hawk was right about one thing. You have the spirit of a bear. I hope that is a compliment. Rowena laughed. It is the highest one there is. Caleb said, It means you protect what is yours, and I am very glad I am yours. He kissed her then, a slow, lingering kiss that promised a future not of explosions and battles, but of quiet evenings and shared burdens. Rowena leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his chest. She looked out at the dark shape of the canyon in the distance. It stood silent and strong, enduring the wind and the rain. She felt the same way. She had weathered the storm. She had faced the town, and she was still standing. Let us go inside. Caleb, she whispered, I think I have a sheriff to mend, and I have a seamstress to thank, he responded. They walked through the door together, closing it against the night, leaving the dust and the stars outside. The laughter of the town had long since faded, replaced by the quiet, steady rhythm of a life being built, one stitch at a time. The seasons in New Mexico territory did not change with the subtle grace of the East Coast. They shifted with the violence of a breaking fever. The storm that had washed Silas Crow into the abyss had taken the heat of summer with it, leaving behind a crisp, golden autumn that smelled of curing sage and wood smoke. Dust water was changing too. The most visible sign of this transformation hung above the door of the largest storefront on Main Street, right next to the newly repaired bank. The sign, painted in bold, unapologetic letters, read Blake's Stitchery. It was no longer hidden in a drafty back room or tucked away like a shameful secret on the second floor of a saloon. It was front and center, occupying prime real estate that had once belonged to a land speculator who had fled town the moment the railroad deal collapsed. Rowena Blake stood in the center of her shop, surrounded by bolts of fabric that ranged from sturdy denim to delicate calico. She was pinning a hem on a dress for Mrs. Gable, the widow of the former mayor. Mrs. Gable was a large woman herself, one who had spent 30 years squeezing herself into corsets that bruised her ribs, trying to disappear inside her own clothes. Breathe, Margaret, Rowena said gently, removing a pin from her mouth. If you pull the laces that tight, you will faint before the doxology. But the fashion, Mrs. Gable worried, patting her ample hips. The fashion is what fits you, Rowena said, her voice firm but kind. We are going to let the seams out 2 inches. You will stand straighter. You will walk farther. And you will look like a woman who owns the ground she stands on, not one apologizing for stepping on it. Mrs. Gable looked in the tall mirror. She took a deep breath, her shoulders relaxing for the first time in years. You know, Rowena, she said softly, no one ever told me I was allowed to be comfortable. We are rewriting the rules. Rowena smiled. The bell above the door jingled. It was not a wealthy rancher's wife this time. It was Big Maud, the saloon owner, followed by 3 of her girls. In the old dust water, respectable women would have gathered their skirts and fled. But here, Mrs. Gable simply nodded a greeting. The shop had become something more than a place of commerce. It was a sanctuary. Women who did not fit the mold, those who were too heavy, too old, too poor, or too opinionated, found that the air inside Rowena's shop was easier to breathe. They gathered around the cutting table, sharing news, complaints, and laughter. Rowena moved among them, her presence commanding. She was still big. She still took up space, but she no longer walked with her head down. She moved with the deliberation of a woman who knew exactly how much force was required to push a crate of dynamite off a cliff, and who knew that her body was the instrument of that miracle. The cultural tapestry of the shop was richer than just the townswomen. In the corner, sitting on a woven rug, 2 young girls from Red Hawk's tribe were teaching a rancher's daughter how to bead a moccasin. Rowena had started trading with the tribe openly. She exchanged steel needles and good thread for their soft, brain-tanned buckskin and vibrant turquoise beads. She incorporated their patterns into her riding coats, creating a style that was unique to Dustwater, a blend of East and West, settler and native, survival and art. "Not so tight," Rowena instructed a young girl named Littlebird, guiding her hand over a piece of silk. "The fabric must flow like water. If you fight it, it puckers." "Like the river," Littlebird said seriously. "Exactly like the river," Rowena agreed. Outside the window, Sheriff Caleb Ward walked by on his patrol. He paused, looking through the glass. He saw Rowena laughing with Big Maud, his eyes softening in a way that made the younger deputies nudge each other and grin. He tipped his hat, and Rowena offered him a small, private smile that warmed him more than the noon sun. Their courtship was not the stuff of dime novels. There were no dramatic swoons or public declarations of undying passion on the church steps. It was a quieter, steadier thing, built on the solid foundation of shared trauma and mutual respect. They did not marry immediately. The town gossip had plenty to say about the sheriff spending his evenings on the porch of the seamstress's new house, but Caleb silenced them with a single, cold look. They were taking their time. They were learning the shape of each other's lives without the pressure of a crisis. One afternoon, when the wheat in the valley was turning the color of old gold, Caleb rode up to the shop leading a spare horse, Rowena's sturdy mule, having been retired to a life of leisure in the paddock. "Close the shop," Caleb said, leaning from his saddle. "I have orders to finish," Rowena protested, though she was already reaching for her shawl. "The orders can wait. The sun is setting, and the canyon is quiet. I want to show you something." They rode out to the ridge, the same path they had taken on that storm-tossed night, but the terror was gone now. The air was still. The river below was a ribbon of placid green, no longer a raging torrent. They stopped at the edge of the cliff, near the scar where the rock face had sheared away. The view stretched for 50 miles, purple mesas, red rock spires, and the endless arching bowl of the sky. Caleb dismounted and helped Rowena down. He did not let go of her waist once her feet touched the ground. He pulled her back against his chest, wrapping his arms around her. She leaned into him, her back resting against his solid front, fitting together like 2 pieces of a puzzle that had finally found their match. "Red Hawk says the spirits are at rest," Caleb murmured into her hair. "And Silas?" Rowena asked, looking down at the river. "Gone," Caleb said. "Washed clean away. The railroad surveyors came through yesterday. They are routing the track 30 miles north. This canyon stays as it is." "We saved it," Rowena whispered. "You saved it," Caleb corrected. He turned her around so he could look into her eyes. His hands rested on her hips, heavy and grounding. "I look at this canyon, and I see the history of the land, but when I look at you, Rowena, I see my future." "It is a big future?" she teased gently. "I have a lot of room in my heart," he replied, his face serious. "I am not a rich man. Rowena, the badge does not pay much, and I have more scars than silver. But everything I am belongs to you." Rowena reached up and touched the scar on his cheek. "A souvenir from the fight with Silas. I do not need silver, Caleb. I need a man who knows that weight is not a burden, but an anchor. I need a man who is not afraid of a storm. I think I can manage that, he said. He kissed her then, a kiss that tasted of the dry desert air and the promise of a long life. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in impossible shades of violet and orange, casting their long, merged shadow across the land they had fought to keep. The day Red Hawk left was a day of mourning for the few who understood what his presence had meant, and a day of relief for those who still held on to their old prejudices. The tribe was moving north, deeper into the mountains, away from the encroaching settlements. They knew that while the railroad had been stopped here, the tide of white expansion was relentless. They chose to withdraw to preserve their way of life a little longer. Red Hawk came to the shop one last time. He did not enter. He sat on his paint horse in the street, waiting. Rowena came out, wiping her hands on her apron. Caleb stood beside her, his hand resting on the butt of his gun, not in threat, but in readiness. You go to the high country, Caleb asked. The air is cleaner there, Red Hawk said. Fewer lies. He looked at Rowena. His dark eyes, usually so guarded, were open and filled with a fierce respect. My people tell stories of the woman of stone, Red Hawk said. They say she moved the mountain when the men were afraid. I just pushed a box, Rowena said, feeling the familiar flush in her cheeks. You pushed the world, Red Hawk corrected. Listen to me, Rowena Blake, the people of your town. They laughed at your body. They saw only flesh, my people. We looked at you and we saw a warrior. We saw strength that could hold up the sky. Do not forget that. When the small voices try to make you small again, remember that you are a giant in the eyes of the red rocks. I will remember, Rowena promised, her voice thick with emotion. Will you come back? The hawk flies where the wind takes him, he said enigmatically. But if the wolf returns to this valley, I will know. He raised his hand in a salute, kicked his heels into his horse's flanks, and rode out of town without looking back. The dust from his horse's hooves hung in the air long after he was gone, a golden mist that settled over the town like a benediction. The climax of their quiet revolution came on a Saturday night, 6 months after the explosion. The Dustwater Saloon was packed. The piano player, a man named Fingers who had replaced the one who used to mock Rowena, was hammering out a lively tune. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of stale beer. Rowena stood at the doors. She was wearing the blue silk dress, the same one she had worn the night of the railroad dance. It had been mended, the tear from the canyon repaired with gold thread, turning the scar into a feature of the design. She took a deep breath. The memory of that night, the laughter, the jeers, the humiliation was a ghost that still haunted the corners of this room. She pushed the doors open. The noise did not stop, but it shifted. Heads turned. A young cowboy near the door, a boy of 19 named Jimmy, who had been one of the loudest mockers, saw her. He scrambled to his feet, snatching his hat off his head. Evening, Miss Blake, he stammered, his face turning beet red. Please, take my chair. It is a good one. Does not wobble. Rowena looked at him. She saw the genuine shame in his eyes. She saw the way the other men were nudging him, ensuring he showed respect. Thank you, Jimmy, she said, offering him a gracious nod. But I did not come here to sit. She walked into the room. The sea of bodies parted for her. There were no whispers of big freight tonight. There were nods of acknowledgement. A miner tipped his hat. The barkeep set a glass of lemonade on the counter without being asked. Caleb was waiting for her near the piano. He was not in uniform tonight. He wore a simple black suit and a crisp white shirt. He looked every inch the man who had held a tycoon over a precipice and pulled him up, and the man who had chosen love over ambition. He walked toward her, his limp from the old leg wound barely noticeable. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the echo of the past. Caleb stopped in front of her. He did not bow. He stood tall, meeting her eye to eye. They are playing our song, he said, a glint of humor in his gray eyes. It is a reel. Caleb. She laughed. We cannot waltz to a reel. We can do whatever we want, he said. We run this town. He held out his hand. Rowena took it. His grip was warm, calloused, and familiar. He pulled her onto the floor. This time, there was no hesitation. Rowena stepped into his arms, her body pressing against his. She felt the solid mass of him, and she knew that her own solid mass was meeting it, equal to equal. He leaned down, his lips brushing her ear. The room faded away. The smell of whiskey and dust vanished. There was only the music and the man. "Let them look," he whispered, echoing the words he had spoken when they were strangers fighting a hostile world. "Let them count every pound. Let them measure every inch." He pulled back slightly to look at her face, his expression fierce and tender. "Perfect for me," he said. This time, Rowena did not freeze. She did not blush with shame. She threw her head back and laughed a full, throaty sound of pure joy that rang out over the piano. "I know," she said, smiling at him with a confidence that could burn down a city. "And you are not so bad yourself. Sheriff?" They spun around the floor, two substantial bodies moving in harmony, rewriting the history of the room with every step. The men watched, not with mockery, but with a quiet envy. They realized that while they had been chasing waif-like illusions, the sheriff had found a woman who could stand in the storm and not break. That was the real prize. The years that followed were kind to Dustwater. It never became the metropolis Silas Crow had dreamed of. It remained a dusty, stubborn town on the edge of the wild, a place for people who did not quite fit in anywhere else. Rowena and Caleb built a life that was woven into the very fabric of the territory. They never became rich, but they were never poor. They had a home filled with books, fabric, and the noise of the town's children, who treated the sheriff's house as a second playground. The final image of their story is not one of gunsmoke or high drama. It is a quiet evening. 10 years later, Rowena and Caleb were sitting on the wide porch of their home. The sun had gone down, and the desert sky was a vast canopy of diamond-hard stars. The wind blew through the sagebrush, carrying the lonely, distant whistle of a train. It was the Santa Fe line, running 30 miles to the north, bypassing the canyon entirely. Rowena sat in a large rocking chair, her hand resting on the arm of Caleb's chair. She was older now. There were silver threads in her hair, and lines of laughter etched around her eyes. She had not grown thinner. If anything, she was more substantial. A matriarch in her own right. She leaned her head on Caleb's shoulder. He reached over and took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. She shifted her weight, settling in for the night, under her. The wood of the chair gave a loud, long creak. In the past, that sound would have made her cringe. It would have been a reminder of her failure to be small, to be light, to be invisible. But tonight, in the cool air of the home she had built, with the man who loved her holding her hand, the sound was different. It was the sound of presence. It was the sound of a woman who was truly there, who occupied her space in the world without apology. It was the sound of a life that was full, heavy with love, and anchored in truth. "Do you hear that train?" Caleb asked softly. "I hear it," Rowena said, closing her eyes and listening to the distant rhythm. "It sounds like it is going exactly where it is supposed to go." "So are we," Caleb said. Rowena squeezed his hand. The chair creaked again as she relaxed completely. A comfortable, domestic rhythm that beat in time with their hearts. She was Rowena Blake, the woman who moved the mountain, and she was exactly where she belonged. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It has been a long journey from the dusty streets of 1878 to this quiet porch. I am grateful you rode along with Rowena and Caleb. If you enjoyed this tale of the Wild West, I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from today. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Do not forget to subscribe to the Wild West Tales channel. Hit that like button to support the storytelling, and press the hype button to help this story reach more listeners who need a reminder that they are perfect just the way they are. Safe travels, partners.